You're not who you were 10 minutes ago. And you won't be the same person when this video ends. But here's the riddle. Who's the one noticing the change? We like to think there's a self steady, observing, in control. But maybe that sense of you is just a brief pause between illusions. A trick of continuity. A placeholder where the story wants a protagonist. Tonight, we'll dive into a theory that slips quietly beneath your thoughts. A theory whispering that consciousness isn't a stream. It's a flicker. A rehearsal of identity without a cast. You are not your memories. Not your voice. Not even your mind. You are the silence between these things. So lie down. Let the present path guide you through this paradox. And if you feel like you're vanishing, you're exactly where you need to be. Close your eyes. Let the room dissolve into sound. Let your breath become the only motion in your body. And now, ask yourself one impossible question. Where is your self right now? Is it in the voice narrating these words? Is it in the awareness listening behind the voice? Is it in your memories, your heartbeat, your name, or is it hiding in the pause you just took? The momentary stillness between asking and answering. This theory begins not with a grand revelation, but with something so subtle you've overlooked it your entire life, that your sense of being someone may not be a continuous stream, but a series of paused illusions, a strobe light flashing across time, a silence dressed up as identity. Think of a movie reel. When it runs, the frames blur into motion. You don't see the gaps, you don't see the stillness between images, but the illusion of movement only works because of that pause, because of those blank spaces between frames. What if your self is built the same way? Philosopher Douglas Hofstadter once asked whether consciousness is just a hallucination. The brain tells itself to make sense of recursive feedback loops, the loops of memory, awareness, identity, and imagination feeding into one another so quickly, we assume a single self must exist to experience them all. But what if that self is just a placeholder, a momentary narrator stitching illusions together? Neuroscience gives us clues. Split brain experiments reveal that when the corpus callosum is severed, the left and right hemispheres behave as if they are two distinct consciousnesses. One side picks up an object, the other side doesn't know why, and yet the brain invents a reason instantly, just to preserve the illusion of a unified self. That invention, the quick, effortless story, is the pause between illusions. It sips the moment when a gap is too terrifying to face, so the mind fills it with you. In Buddhist philosophy, this is called anatta, the doctrine of no self. Not that nothing exists, but that what we call the self is not a solid, lasting entity. It is a process. A flame flickering across time, always moving, always changing, never the same twice. The moment you try to grasp it, it vanishes into the next. And yet you feel like someone. That feeling is powerful. It anchors you to a timeline. It lets you say, I am the same person I was yesterday. But memory is notoriously unreliable. It rewrites itself. It absorbs stories, hearsay, and imagination. What if that continuity is just a cognitive placeholder between illusions? In your dreams, don't you sometimes switch roles without noticing? One moment, you are yourself. The next, you are someone else, or watching from a distance, or embodying a feeling without a body. And when you wake up, you still feel like you. But who was that? Maybe the waking world isn't so different. Maybe we're just better at forgetting the gaps. Think back to a moment when you lost time. Maybe you were driving, or meditating, or staring at a candle. For minutes or hours, you weren't narrating your life. You weren't recalling your name. You weren't planning the future. And yet, something was there. Something felt present. But it wasn't a self. It was a pause, a blank frame between illusions. Cognitive scientist Thomas Metzinger argues that there is no self in the brain, no central point from which experience emerges. Instead, the brain generates a phenomenal self-model, a user interface that creates the illusion of a center, like a cursor on a screen. It feels real, but try to find it, you won't. Because it sits not there, it never was. What this means is simple and terrifying. What you call I is just the seam in the stitching, the part where two fragments meet, the breath between thoughts, the second before language catches up. And yet, this illusion is not a mistake. It's a necessity. Without it, we'd collapse into chaos. We'd forget our stories, our goals, our relationships. The self may be false, but it is a useful fiction. a pause that lets the machine reboot again and again without remembering it already shut down. Your identity may just be a self-regulating illusion, a narrative device, a momentary agreement between memory and attention that lasts just long enough to say, I am here. But even that presence is a flicker. Right now, you are listening. But what about now? And now? If you slow down enough, you might feel the moments when you disappear, when the illusion pauses, when experience goes on without you. And in those moments, those beautiful silent gaps, you'll begin to understand what this theory suggests, that yourself is not a thing. It's not even a person, it's just the echo between illusions. The punctuation in a sentence no one is writing, the brief silence between one story and the next. So rest in that pause. Don't sit, try to hold it. Don't sit, try to name it. Just feel it. And let it vanish again. Because the moment you notice it, you too already someone else. Breathe in slowly. Now breathe out. In that quiet exhale, ask yourself, not with words but with attention, what are you made of? Not physically, not cells and bones and blood, but psychologically, spiritually, experientially. Strip away the name, strip away the job, the nationality, the roles, what remains, what is left of you when all descriptions are erased. This is the paradox we now face. You feel like someone real, but when we examine the architecture of that someone, peel back the layers, what we often find is nothing solid, nothing substantial, just thoughts pretending to be a thinker. The philosopher David Hume, centuries ago, sat quietly and examined his mind. He could find thoughts. Yes, he could find sensations, emotions, memories, but he could never locate a self behind them. Just a parade of perceptions, a stream with no riverbed, no unchanging core. In his words, I never can catch myself without a perception. This is not a flaw in your brain. It's the way your mind was designed to operate. What we call self may not be a container, but an emergent effect, a mirage that appears when perception organizes itself around memory and habit. Let's try something now. Picture a red apple in your mind. Now ask who imagined that apple. The answer might seem obvious. I did. But slow down. Watch what really happened. A thought rose, an image appeared, then afterward, another thought arrived that said, I did that. That's how it works. The sense of self emerges after the event, like a shadow trying to claim authorship over the sun. Neurologically, this is backed by studies of intention and decision-making. The famous Libet experiments show that our brains begin to initiate action milliseconds before we're consciously aware of deciding. In other words, the conscious self is not the author. It's the narrator that shows up late and pretends it was in charge. So if you are not your thoughts, and you are not your intentions, then what exactly are you? You might say, I am my consciousness. But even consciousness is a slippery thing. It flickers in and out. You're not aware of your body until you stub your toe. You're not aware of your breath until you focus on it. You lose yourself in movies, in music, in memories. When attention shifts, so does the sense of self. You become what you focus on. For a moment, you are a problem at work. Then you are a childhood memory. Then you are a craving for food. The you keeps changing. So what is constant? That question has haunted spiritual seekers and scientists alike. Is there a background awareness, a watcher, a stable core behind the curtain? But when you search for it, it slips away. You can observe your thoughts, you can observe your emotions, but you can't observe the observer, because the moment you try, you split into two. The seeker becomes the sought, and the illusion resets. Some traditions call this Maya, the veil of illusion. Others call it Anatman, non-self. In contemporary neuroscience, it's sometimes referred to as modular mind theory, the idea that different processes in the brain take turns, holding the mic, creating a false impression of a unified speaker. Imagine a stage play where every character believes they are the lead, because the script never reveals the whole story. Each emotion, thought, impulse, and memory takes center stage briefly, but there is no director, no author, just improvisation in an empty theater. And you are the applause echoing afterward. Now let's return to your daily life. Think about how often you say I in a day. I need coffee. I feel tired. I stun worried. I want to change. Each of these is a claim, a contract between language and identity, But what if those statements are just grammatical conveniences? What if I is just a linguistic trick, a shorthand for a moving target? This matters more than you think. Because if the self is not substantial, then your suffering, your pride, your shame, your fear, they are not permanent possessions. They are passing clouds mistaken for sky. They are illusions mistaken for substance. This doesn't mean you are meaningless. It means you are unbound. If you are not one thing, then you are not trapped in the roles you play. You are not limited to your past. You are not broken by your mistakes. You are the pause between illusions, and in that pause, there is freedom. When you feel overwhelmed, ask yourself, who is overwhelmed? You might answer automatically, I am. But look deeper. Feel deeper. Don't name the emotion. Just feel it as a passing sensation. Notice that it arrives, it peaks, and it fades. The you it came for has already changed. And that sips the point. You are never the same, you twice. What remains is not a substance, but a space, a gap, a breath, a witnessing that cannot be held, cannot be owned, cannot be proven, but is undeniably present. Not as a self, but as the possibility of seeing, as the quiet between identities. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you may catch glimpses of this emptiness. You may feel yourself vanish and return. You may notice the moment when the thinker disappears and only thought remains. That sip's not something to fear. That sip's something to welcome. Because in the absence of substance, you begin to taste truth. Not truth spoken by a self, but truth that emerges when the self steps aside. So let it fade. Let it unravel. Let it dissolve into the silence. You were never supposed to hold on to it anyway. You are not the thing that sips happening. You are the pause. Right before it does. When was the last time you felt like yourself? Was it this morning? Last week? Last year? Or did it slip by unnoticed, quietly replaced by someone else who wears your memories like hand-me-down clothes? Identity is supposed to be stable. That's what we've been told. You are you. And that self stretches back in a straight, unbroken line through time. But if you look closely, that line isn't a line at all. It's a shattered mirror, glued together with memory, habit, and belief. And if you tilt that mirror just slightly, you'll see the cracks. You always have. This section begins with something subtle but unavoidable, the experience of being different people in different rooms. Around your friends, you laugh louder. Around your parents, you become smaller, younger. In silence, you become contemplative. In conflict, you become sharp. And when no one's watching, you become vague, undefined, or maybe more real. So who spits the real you? Psychologists call this contextual identity. It means that your sense of self is fluid, not fixed, like water poured into different vessels. It takes the shape of the container it's in, and yet, you still feel like you across those states. But if your personality changes, your emotions shift, your values evolve, and your memories blur, what exactly is staying the same? This is where identity begins to fragment. You are not one unified person. You are a collage. You are layers of stories told in different languages, stitched together across time. And the strange part? Some of those stories were never yours to begin with. You've inherited fragments from parents, teachers, media, culture, trauma. You carry voices inside you that aren't your own, but they speak in first person. They say, I am not good enough. I must work harder. I need to be liked. But whose voice is that? When did it begin? Many of us never ask. But you are asking now. And that is where the illusion begins to crack. There's a reason dissociation feels so eerie. It reveals something most of us already suspect, that the I we rely on isn't as solid as we thought, that it's fragile, interchangeable, a rotating cast of inner selves playing roles for an absent director. Even in daily life, we often say things like, I wasn't sit myself today, or that wasn't sit like me. These phrases hint at a deeper truth, that me is plural, that identity is not a single thread, but a tangled skein, woven and rewoven by circumstance. And yet, we resist this truth, because the idea of fragmentation feels dangerous. If I'm not one person, then who am I? Let's slow down for a moment. Take a breath. Feel the room around you. Notice the thoughts rising in your mind. And now answer this, silently. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Not just your physical location, your mental one. Are you in the past? The future? Somewhere in between? And who is the you answering? This moment, this act of noticing, is the portal. Fragmented identity isn't a problem. It's a reality, a mosaic, not a flaw, an understanding that can bring peace. Because if you are not one fixed thing, you don't have to keep performing the same version of yourself just to feel real. Memory too plays a trick here. Neuroscience shows us that every time you recall a memory, you reconstruct it, slightly altered, slightly edited. Your brain fills in blanks, removes pieces, adds others. So the past you think defines you is already a fiction. The you remember is a role you keep revising. And yet, it feels real, because the illusion is sticky, familiar, warm. But what if the truest self isn't set in the memory? What if it sits in the noticing? You are a library of selves. A crowd, not a character. And in quiet moments, right before sleep, or in stillness, or when you wake from a vivid dream, you can feel them shifting. One self sighs and exits, another enters, carrying a new posture, a new thought, a new reaction. Your identity is not broken. It sits adaptive. And paradoxically, that fluidity is what allows you to heal. Because if no single self is fixed, then no single pain is permanent. No label is forever. No role is your prison. Sometimes healing is not about becoming whole. Sometimes it sips about embracing the fact that you are already many, and that those many can learn to breathe together. When you stop trying to find the real you make room for what's actually there. And what sits there is presence. Not a self, not a name, not a role. Just awareness flowing between fragments. Each version of you is valid. Each version is temporary. Each version is real and not real in the same breath. So don't fear the fragments. They are not signs of failure. They are the echoes of a self that was never one thing to begin with. And if you listen closely, you'll hear them whisper to each other. As you drift from one illusion into the next. You've blinked 1,000 times today. Each blink less than a second. Each one a disappearance of the world. A blackout. A tiny death of perception. And yet, you don't remember them. You don't fear them. You don't even notice them. But something odd happens when you begin to look between the blinks. There are gaps in awareness. Silent moments in your experience that vanish before they arrive. Places where your consciousness isn't. And if awareness is the bedrock of self, what does it mean when it turns off? Where do you go? This section is not about grand metaphysics. It's about something immediate. Something you experience every day but are trained not to notice. The places where your mind skips, where your self disappears, and something else, something quiet takes its place. Let's begin with the most familiar gap. Sleep. Each night, you vanish. Not into a dream. Not into a story. Into nothing. Hours pass, and you have no memory of them. You are not conscious. And when you wake, you say, I slept. But who is that I? Who was there during the nothing? You weren't gone. Your heart kept beating. Your body moved. You rolled over. You even processed sounds. But the you that narrates, your inner voice, was absent. Awareness took a break, and you returned without noticing you ever left. You do this every night. And yet, each morning, you feel continuous. That is the illusion. In cognitive science, this is called temporal binding, the mind's ability to weave disconnected experiences into a single thread of awareness. The gaps are erased, smoothed over, so you never question the breaks. Even in waking life, these gaps exist. You forget parts of conversations, lose time while scrolling, walk into a room and forget why, experience déjà vu, daydream through traffic. Your attention lags, vanishes, returns, and when it returns, your mind retroactively fills the blank, like a film editor slicing out frames. And you, the protagonist, never notice. Some studies suggest that your brain stitches together consciousness every few hundred milliseconds, that what feels like a smooth stream is actually a patchwork, a quilt of perception tied together by memory and assumption. There is no continuous now. There is only a series of frozen moments with gaps in between. Your awareness is like a lighthouse beam. It swings, it focuses, it misses, And in the dark spots, the illusion of self pauses. But instead of noticing the break, your mind says, "This was me all along." But what if you paid attention to the breaks? Meditation teaches this. Sit in stillness and watch the breath. Thought comes, it fades. Silence follows. Another thought arises. If you stay long enough, you begin to notice the spaces. The moments when there is no thought, no self, no narrative. Only awareness. Or the absence of it. These are not mistakes. They are not glitches. They are the truth behind the curtain. Your consciousness is not a constant beam. It's a flickering flame, and the flicker matters. Because if the self only exists during awareness, then in the gaps, who are you? This question unravels more than philosophy. It touches identity, morality, and even memory. You forget most of your life, the details of your childhood, the sound of yesterday's wind, the thoughts you had at lunch. They're gone, but you don't mourn them, because you trust that you continued. But how do you know? The illusion of continuity is strong. It helps you function, but it may also hide a deeper reality, that your identity is built in the moments between awareness, that your mind is constantly filling in missing time, inventing transitions, smoothing edges that were never there. Think about movie scenes cut together. A man opens a door in one frame. In the next, he sips walking across a street. You don't question how he got there. Your brain does the same with yourself. From blink to blink, sleep to waking, thought to thought, you are a collage, held together by forgetting, and that forgetting is where awareness hides. When you dream, you're not aware of your waking self. When you're lost in thought, you're not aware of the thinker. When you act out of habit, there's no watcher, only doing. So the question becomes, if awareness vanishes so easily, if your self flickers in and out, who is living your life? This isn't sit meant to unsettle you. It's SEP's meant to free you. Because the idea of being a constant self, unbroken and in control, is exhausting. It's false, it's heavy, but the truth of gaps, of flickers, of spaces, is gentle. You don't have to be on all the time. You don't have to hold the thread. It holds itself. And even when you forget, you are still being lived. There is peace in the pause. There is grace in the gap. And once you begin to feel it, not conceptually but viscerally, you realize that your identity is not the constant hum of awareness, but the rhythm of its coming and going. In music, silence gives the notes their shape. In speech, the pause gives words their meaning. In consciousness, the gaps give the self its illusion. Tonight, you will enter those gaps again. You till blink. You till vanish. You till return. But maybe this time, you'll notice the space between, not as emptiness, but as freedom. Because sometimes the clearest sign that you were here is how gently you disappeared. Stand in front of a mirror. Look into your own eyes. Not for a second. Not casually. Hold the gaze. Watch what happens. At first, you see familiarity, the image you've been trained to recognize as you. The same eyes, the same mouth, the same slight tilt of the head. But if you stare long enough without speaking, without moving, that image begins to shift. Not physically, not grotesquely, but subtly. It becomes other. That's the mirror's secret. It reflects what you bring, but never what you are. And if the mind stutters for even a moment, the illusion of identity starts to unravel. Because a mirror holds nothing. It returns everything, and keeps none of it. Just like you. Let's pause here for a breath. Before we go deeper into the illusion, can you share your location, and what time it is where you're watching this? Say it out loud if you like, or just whisper it in your mind. Now ask yourself, who just answered? The mirror doesn't stun, it only reflects. The metaphor of the mirror is older than psychology. It has existed in nearly every spiritual and philosophical tradition as a symbol for the self. In Zen Buddhism, the mind is said to be like a mirror, covered with dust. Our job is not to create the truth, but to wipe away the layers that obscure it. But here's the twist. Once you clean the mirror completely, there's nothing there. This isn't set failure. It sets the point. What we call self may be just the dust we've mistaken for substance. The stories we've told so many times they feel like a face. But when those stories pause, when memory doesn't rush in to fill the silence, the reflection becomes blank. And that blankness is terrifying. because we fear being no one. But what if no one is not a void, but a doorway? Let's return to psychology. The mirror test, developed by Gordon Gallup in 1970, was created to determine whether animals possess self-recognition. A mark is placed on the animal's body, and then they are given access to a mirror. If they touch or investigate the mark on themselves, they pass. They recognize that the image is not another animal, but them. Only a few species pass. Great apes, dolphins, elephants, magpies, and humans after about 18 months of age. But here's the strange part. What we interpret as recognizing the self might also be the beginning of mistaking the reflection for the self, the birth of identity, the start of a loop. From that moment on, you never look in a mirror and see just shapes. You see a person, you see you, and everything about that you is wrapped in history, how you think others see you, how you looked in that old photo, how you should look. But beneath that reflection, there is no mirror self, just a bouncing of light off glass. So if a mirror holds nothing, and yet convinces you that something solid is there, what else in your life is doing the same? Your name? Your voice? Your thoughts? Thoughts reflect experience, but they are not the experience. Emotions mirror interactions, but they are not the interaction. And your memories? They are shadows reflected across decades, flickering and changing, edited each time they are recalled. We live surrounded by mirrors. Language, belief, expectation. Each one returning an image we assume must be me. But what happens if we stop assuming? What if the reflection you chase isn't set you, but a placeholder for what cannot be seen directly? This idea appears in neuroscience too. There is no center of consciousness in the brain, no mirror room where a little version of you sits watching everything. That's called homunculus fallacy, the mistaken idea that there is a mini-self inside you doing all the watching. There isn't set. There SIPs only processes, chemical signals, networks firing, and then a mirror-like effect. It feels like someone is watching, but no one is. Or rather, the watcher is made from watching itself. Just like a mirror that believes it holds a face. In spiritual philosophy, this can be liberating. The Hindu concept of neti, not this, not that, teaches that you are not your body, not your mind, not your roles, not your thoughts. Each layer peeled away brings you closer, not to something, but to nothing, to pure witnessing. And that witnessing is not personal. It doesn't belong to you. It just is. Imagine standing in front of a mirror again, but this time, instead of trying to see yourself, you try to see the seeing. You try to catch the act of perception itself, not the image, but the looking. It slips away. It can sit beheld, because there is no object to grasp. And in that moment, something becomes clear. You are not the reflection. You are not even the one reflected. You are the space in which the mirror appears. The pause before the light bounces back. Tonight, as you close your eyes and sleep begins to pull at the edges of thought, you may catch a glimpse of this. A moment when you look inward and see nothing. But in that nothing, you feel peace. Not the peace of answers, but the peace of no longer needing one. Because the self you thought was real was just a mirror, holding nothing, reflecting everything, and vanishing the moment you look too closely. A thought arises. I should be doing more. You feel it. You believe it. But pause. Who said that? You might reply, I did. It came from me. But if you rewind, if you slow down the moment of its arrival, you'll notice something strange. The thought appeared on its own, like a breeze, like a flicker, like a whisper, entering a room you didn't open. And yet, it felt like you. That sips the disguise. The illusion that thought is authored by the self, when it might be the other way around. What if you are not the thinker? What if thought is just passing through, wearing your voice like a mask? Let's peel this open slowly. You experience thousands of thoughts each day. Some are helpful, some are absurd, some are brutal. But all of them arrive in the same way without warning, without your request. They simply appear, spontaneously, involuntarily, often chaotically. You don't control the next thought you still have. Try it. Decide right now what your next thought will be. Silence. Then something appears. But was it really chosen? Or did it just happen? This is not philosophy. It's observation. It's the raw texture of experience. And when you start to really watch your thoughts arise, the illusion of authorship begins to wobble, because if you didn't choose the thought, who did? There sips a famous analogy used by meditation teachers. You are the sky. Thoughts are the weather. They come and go, but they are not the sky. But most of us mistake the cloud for the sky, the thought for the self. A negative thought appears. I still not good enough. And instead of recognizing it as just weather, you become the thought. You fuse with it. You let it define you, even though 5 minutes earlier it didn't exist. You are being possessed by a sentence. And the strangest part? That sentence might not even be yours. Thoughts are not isolated to the mind that hosts them. They are influenced by culture, language, environment, media, and memory. They are echoes, sometimes ancestral, sometimes random, sometimes borrowed. But once they land in your head, they speak in your voice. They pretend they came from you. But what if the you is a construction built by those thoughts? Some neuroscientists argue that the sense of self is an afterthought, literally, that the brain makes decisions, forms perceptions, and generates emotions all before the sense of I kicks in to take credit. Consider the readiness potential, a measurable electrical signal in the brain that precedes conscious decisions by hundreds of milliseconds. When you reach to pick up a cup, the brain has already initiated the movement before you feel like you've chosen to do it. The self is late to its own party, and yet, it takes ownership. It says, I decided, even when the data suggests it didn't stet. This is called confabulation, the brain's ability to create coherent narratives out of disconnected fragments. It doesn't lie maliciously, it just needs the story to make sense. And in that story, there must be a thinker. So it creates one. A narrator. A self. An I. But the thinker is made of thought. It is not behind them. It is them. Like a fire made of flames. Like a storm made of wind. No separate entity sits above it all, pulling strings. Their sep's just the illusion of continuity. The voice in your head says, this is me. And you believe it. But notice this. Sometimes, that voice is cruel. Sometimes, it sits brilliant. Sometimes it sits tired or angry or afraid. It changes. Its tone, its tempo, its content, all shift based on mood, energy, environment. Would a real, stable self be so inconsistent? Or is the inconsistency a clue? You are not your thoughts. You are not the thinker. You are the space in which thought happens. The awareness noticing them. The witness that cannot be found, because it's not a thing. It serves a function. Some traditions call this pure awareness. Others call it no mind. But names don't matter here. What matters is the experience, the direct seeing of thought as not you. Try this now. Close your eyes. Wait for the next thought to arise. Don't set, force it, just observe. When it comes, notice its shape, its rhythm, its emotional weight. Now ask, did you create it? Or did it appear? Did you approve it before it arrived? Or did it slip through the door and call itself you? This is the liberation point. Not a rejection of thought, but a decentering of it. You don't have to stop thinking. You only have to stop mistaking thought for self. And in that space, freedom opens. You are no longer at war with your mind. No longer held hostage by every passing criticism, craving, fear, or judgment. You become the stillness beneath the movement. A mirror that reflects, but does not cling. A sky that hosts the storm, but is never damaged by it. This doesn't mean the mind becomes quiet. It means the noise is seen clearly. And in that clarity, something profound happens. You stop trying to be the thinker. You start noticing the thinking, and the illusion begins to dissolve. You don't disappear. You just return to what you always been. The background. The awareness. The pause between thoughts. The pause between illusions. So next time a thought arises and says, I am not enough. Pause. Breathe. And smile. Because you seen the trick. You caught the disguise. And now, you don't have to believe it anymore. Close your eyes and try to remember your earliest memory. Was it a birthday? A fall from a bicycle? A face leaning over your crib? Now, pause. How do you know that memory is real? You might answer, because I remember it. But what does that really mean? Tonight, we explore memory, not as a trusted archive, but as an echo chamber, a looping song that replays fragments so often, we mistake the repetition for truth. Because memory doesn't just recall, it rewrites. It doesn't just store, it performs. And what it performs becomes you. But what if the self you remember is only an echo of an echo? We begin with a gentle contradiction. Your memories define who you are. And yet, most of them are false. Not fabricated like fiction, but reshaped, blurred, stitched together from fragments. Cognitive scientists call this reconsolidation, the process by which every act of remembering alters the original memory. Each time you recall an event, your brain doesn't retrieve a fixed file, it rebuilds it. Like sculpting clay that never hardens, it adds details, deletes others, absorbs feelings from the present, and stores it again, as if it were the original. And so, your past changes every time you visit it. This isn't set a flaw. It sets us how the brain works. But the implications are enormous. You believe you're the same person you were 5 years ago because of memory, but if those memories are unstable, shifting with every recall, then what continuity are you trusting? The you of 5 years ago may be no more than a myth sustained by echoes. Let's look deeper. In one experiment, researchers told participants a story about their childhood involving getting lost in a shopping mall. The participants denied it at first, but after several retellings, a significant number began to remember the event. They added details, emotional reactions, visuals, even though the event never happened. False memories aren't sit rare, they sit common. And they don't feel false. They feel real. Because memory's job is not to record, it's to construct meaning. And meaning, like identity, shifts over time. You might think of a painful breakup, a joyful vacation, a traumatic childhood moment. You feel the emotion, you see the image, and you say, this happened. But what you're seeing now is not the memory itself. You're seeing the latest version of the story, edited subconsciously for coherence, identity, and emotional survival. Memory is not the past. It is your present mind sits best guess at the past. And here sits where it gets even more disorienting. What if memory is not just rewriting the past, but creating the illusion of self in the present? Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio proposes that our sense of self emerges from the brain's mapping of body states over time. Emotions, sensations, memories, all feed into a narrative stream that says, this is me, but remove the stream, and the narrator vanishes. In Alzheimer's and dementia patients, as memory deteriorates, identity begins to dissolve, not just in terms of recognition, but in personality, beliefs, and selfhood. The person becomes someone else, not metaphorically, but literally, because without memory, the self has no spine. And yet, even now, you feel like a consistent self. Why? Because memory echoes itself. You remember the remembering. You recall not just events, but your last interpretation of those events. And the echo gets louder with repetition. This is why therapy, journaling, and storytelling are so powerful. They don't just express experience, they shape it. They solidify certain versions of self, while discarding others. But it also means that many of your defining traits are based on feedback loops. For example, if you believe you stir bad at relationships, you might remember every argument more vividly than every act of love. That version of memory reinforces the story. I am not lovable. Then your brain prioritizes that version, replays it, strengthens it, until it becomes identity. But that identity is not fixed. It is sculpted by selective echoes. Even your most intimate self-stories, your courage, your shame, your pride, are echoes reinforced over time. And if that sits true, then your identity is not solid. It sips a chorus, singing a song the present needs to hear. Sometimes that song is survival. Sometimes it sips repetition. Sometimes it sits just habit. But what if you stopped singing? What if, instead of narrating your past again tonight, you sat in the stillness between memories? What would remain? Maybe not a name, not a story, but presence. An open field. An awareness before the echoes begin. Some traditions describe this as awakening, not remembering more, but remembering less. Letting go of the need for continuity. Releasing the idea that a single story must bind your life together. You might ask, But without memory, who am I? And the answer is gentle. You are this. This breath. This noticing. This pause between echoes. You don't need to erase your past. But you don't need to believe every echo either. You can hold your memories like a book of poems, meaningful, flawed, beautiful, and unfinished. And you can close the book when you're ready to sleep. Because tonight, you are not the child who fell. You are not the lover who left. You are not the dreamer who failed. You are not the voice that said, "This is who I am." You are the silence listening to the echo. The pause before the past rises again. And if you stay there long enough, you may hear nothing at all. And find in that stillness, the most honest version of you. A breeze touches your skin. You feel it. But who is feeling it? A sound breaks the silence. An engine passing in the distance, a dog barking, the breath of someone sleeping nearby. You hear it. But who is listening? You move your arm, shift your head, swallow. Sensations ripple through your body, and your mind seems to notice them. But if you stop here, right now, if you stop the narration, who's actually witnessing the experience? This section explores something unsettling and liberating. That experience happens, even when the you is gone. Even when awareness is absent. Even when there is no voice saying I am here. Because consciousness may be less like a movie watched by a viewer, and more like a storm with no center, an orchestra with no conductor. Let's begin where you are now in this moment. Take a breath. Not slowly, not forcefully, just naturally. Then take another. And watch how experience unfolds by itself. You didn't decide to notice your breath. It arrived in awareness on its own. The sensation, the rhythm, the quiet air moving in and out. And then came the thought, I sit and breathing. That thought is the witness speaking. But the breathing happened before the witness. The sensation came first. The narration came after. And if you're honest, radically honest, you'll admit that most of your life works this way. Things happen. Then you notice. Then you explain. But the explanation isn't the experience. The witness isn't the act. There are moments when this becomes obvious. Times when you are so immersed, so fully engaged, that there is no inner commentary. Watching a sunset, dancing, laughing uncontrollably, falling in love, or falling asleep. In those moments there is only experience. No narrator, no label, no self standing apart. And yet, they are often the most real moments of your life. Why? Because the witness was silent. This invites a terrifying question. If no one is witnessing, does the experience still count? We assume that someone must be home for a moment to be real, that a self must be watching to give it meaning. But what if that's not true? What if the witness is optional? Neuroscience offers clues. Most of what your brain processes never enters consciousness. It filters out 99% of sensory input. You don't feel your clothes most of the time. You don't notice your blinking. Your heart beats. Your lungs expand. Experience unfolds constantly, without needing a self to supervise. Even in survival, this is true. When you touch a hot stove, your hand pulls away before you consciously feel pain. The reflex acts without permission. No you is needed. The body moves. The brain adjusts. And only afterward does the witness arrive to say, "Ow, that hurt." That post hoc narration is the illusion of agency. It's not the self in charge. It sips the self arriving late to the scene. And here sips the core idea. Experience doesn't need a self to happen. It just needs openness, presence, space. You can see this in dreams. During REM sleep, you experience entire worlds. You fly, you speak, you fear, you love. But often, there is no reflective awareness. No, I am dreaming. Just raw, immersive experience. And yet, those moments are vivid, emotional, unforgettable. The self was absent, but the experience was real. In deep meditation, the same can occur. A practitioner might sit in stillness, and after some time the sense of me dissolves. There sips no thought, no label, no separation. Just sensation, just awareness. No witness, but full presence. And the paradox is this. Instead, not unconscious. It something more conscious, because there sits nothing obscuring the experience. When you strip away the witness, the commentary, the narrative, the identity, what remains is unfiltered being. Reality without a middleman. Some traditions call this pure consciousness. Others call it no self. But you don't need a name. You just need to feel it. Try this. Close your eyes. Let a sound come to you. Don't label it. Don't say that sip's a bird, or that sip's traffic. Just hear. Then let a sensation rise. Maybe the pressure of your body against the bed. Maybe your heartbeat. Maybe warmth in your hands. Just feel. Now stop describing. Stop watching. Let the experience be itself. In this space there is no witness. No one to say I am here. But experience is here. It never left. And if you can stay in that openness, even for a moment, you'll begin to sense something deeper than self. A field of awareness that doesn't belong to anyone. A flow of life that doesn't need narration. You don't have to claim every thought. You don't have to narrate every feeling. You don't have to monitor the moment. It is already happening. It always was. The witness is a helpful tool. It gives structure. It provides reflection. But it's not required for life to move. Like the moon reflecting the sun, the witness only shines when there is something else to reflect. But the sun experience itself shines whether anyone is watching or not. So when the voice in your head says, I am here, smile gently. Thank it for showing up. Then step back into the silence, where experience goes on, without needing to be seen. You are not the witness. You are the witnessing. And even that is just another cloud, passing through an endless sky. There steps a voice in your head. You heard it all day. Sometimes it sounds like you. Sometimes like someone else. Sometimes it whispers kindness. Other times, it spits poison. But have you noticed how often it changes? How often the narrator, this inner voice of you, rewrites itself mid-sentence. You begin a thought with confidence. I know exactly what I want. And an hour later, I have no idea who I am. One moment, the narrator is brave. The next, it's doubtful, then poetic, then cruel, then philosophical, then bored. And the strangest part, each version claims to be the real you. This section explores the invisible mechanism behind the illusion of self-continuity, the narrator that never stops speaking, and never stays the same. We begin with an everyday example. You stir having a conversation. Someone says something that touches a nerve. Suddenly, you're not just listening, you're defending. A story activates. A character enters. And a voice begins to narrate internally. They always do this. They don't understand me. I need to protect myself. Who decided that this was the narrator now? You didn't invite it. It showed up. Fully formed, fully believable, fully you. But if you rewind the moment, if you examine it with clarity, you'll realize something unsettling. That voice wasn't set there a minute ago. It arrived because of stimulus. It took the stage in response. And when the moment passes, it will leave, replaced by another. This is the nature of the shifting narrator. Your internal monologue is not a consistent speaker. It's an improvisational cast, a rotating committee, and each voice pretends to be permanent. One voice narrates your ambition. Another narrates your regret. One explains your beliefs. Another questions your worth. Each voice uses the same pronoun. But behind that letter, there is no stable speaker. Just roles. Just masks. Neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga studied patients with split brain surgery, where the two hemispheres of the brain could no longer communicate. In one famous experiment, he showed an image to the right hemisphere, which can't speak, and asked the left hemisphere, which can speak, to explain the behavior that followed. The patient acted on the image, without conscious understanding, and then immediately invented a story to explain it, with complete confidence, with no idea the story was fiction. That sips the narrator at work, always spinning a tale, always claiming authorship, even when it has no idea what sips really happening. It doesn't care about truth. It cares about coherence. Your mind needs a me to hold the story together. So it generates one. and regenerates it, and regenerates it again, every few seconds, every emotional state, every context, and you believe each one. The narrator shifts based on mood, energy, environment, hunger, fatigue, memory, hormones, weather, the last thing someone said to you, the music playing in the background, the look on a stranger's face. 1,000 variables shape your inner monologue, but the illusion is that it's all coming from one solid place. From you. Try this. Think of a painful memory. Notice the voice that arises. What tone does it use? What metaphors? What speed? Now think of a moment of success. How does the voice change? Same brain. Different narrators. Now think of how your inner voice sounded 10 years ago. Or when you sit sick. Or when you stare falling in love. These aren't set, just mood swings. They are identity performances. Each with its own worldview, its own vocabulary, its own emotional logic. And all of them are temporary. So, which one is the real you? That question haunts many. It creates existential confusion. If the narrator keeps shifting, then where's the constant? But maybe the problem is the question. Maybe the search for a consistent narrator is like trying to find the wind by chasing leaves. The wind moves them, but it isn't set in them. It animates, but it does not belong. Similarly, maybe there is no stable narrator. Maybe there is just the capacity for narration. A space in which voices arise. A silence that holds many masks. In Buddhist psychology, this is recognized as an atta, non-self. Not that there is no experience, but that there is no permanent entity behind experience. The narrator is a process, not a person. And when you begin to see this, when you really feel the shifting nature of your internal dialogue, you stop clinging to any single story. You can still use the voices. They spur useful. But you don't still believe them the way you used to. You don't still assume every thought is true. You don't assume every emotion is identity. You don't assume every I is you. And in that space, something opens. You start to notice the transitions. You catch the moment when one narrator exits and another enters. You witness the mindset's theater with less urgency. You start to hear the silence between lines. And that silence is not empty. It sits where presence lives. Because beneath the voices, beneath the opinions, memories, reactions, and scripts, there is something that doesn't speak. Something that doesn't change. Not a self. Not a soul. But a space. A noticing. An openness. You are not the narrator. You are not even the narration. You are the space in which narration happens. So tonight, as your mind spins stories in the dark, watch the narrators appear. Watch them perform. Watch them try to convince you. Then smile. And let them go. Because tomorrow, another one will arrive. And it will speak in the same voice. Use the same name. Tell you it's always been here. But now, you tell no better. You looked out at the world your entire life. You've gazed through windows, through mirrors, through memories. But have you ever turned that gaze around? Not metaphorically. Not as a question of reflection. Literally. Have you ever tried to look at the looker? It sits an ancient paradox, one that mystics and neuroscientists both return to again and again. The gaze that sees everything, cannot see itself. The watcher, when searched for, vanishes. The origin of awareness, your most intimate sense of self, remains forever hidden. But still, it gazes. Still, it sees, and yet, no matter how long you look, you never find the one who is looking. This is the mystery of a gaze without origin. And tonight, we walk straight into it. Start with your daily experience. Right now, you start hearing these words. There's a center to this awareness, a place where the sounds seem to land. It feels like you are located somewhere behind the eyes. Not in your fingers, not in your feet, but somewhere in your head, behind the face, behind the forehead, sitting quietly, watching. That feeling is strong. So strong it never occurs to question it. You think, of course I sit behind my eyes. Where else would I be? But here sits the problem. When scientists look for the self in the brain, they find no such center. No seat of consciousness. No inner eye, no cockpit. Just processes, patterns, interactions. The you behind the gaze is a construction, an elegant illusion, and that illusion is stitched together by attention. What you call I is often just the sum total of what's being noticed. Consider this. When you're focused on a task, writing, painting, solving a puzzle, you often forget yourself completely. You are absorbed, flowing, present, and only later do you say, I was really focused. But during the act itself, where was the I? It wasn't set gone. It was never there to begin with. You were looking, but there was no one doing the looking. This is what philosopher Thomas Metzinger calls the transparent self-model, the sense that there is someone inside experiencing life, but this someone is just a model the brain uses to organize information. It's not an object. It has no fixed location. And when you search for it directly, you find nothing. Try it. Close your eyes for a moment and ask, where is the one who is aware? Not your thoughts, not your voice, not your memories, just the raw awareness. The gaze. Don't answer too quickly. Don't rush to a spiritual metaphor. Just look, and you still discover something strange. You can find the source. Awareness is happening. But the I doing it doesn't yet appear. This isn't a flaw in your technique. It strips the essence of consciousness. The gaze has no origin. It arises in the absence of a watcher. It's like light filling a room with no bulb in sight. Like a voice singing from a cave whose mouth you can't locate. It sees, it listens, it knows, but it belongs to no one. Many spiritual traditions speak of this moment, the collapse of the inner observer. In Zen, they call it Kensho, seeing into one's true nature. In Advaita Vedanta they say, you are not the body. You are not the mind. You are the awareness of both. But even that can become a trap, because it implies a subject who has awareness. But awareness has no subject. It is not owned. It just is. In fact, one of the most unsettling realizations on the path of introspection is this. Your gaze is not private. Not because someone else can access it, but because it isn't yours to begin with. The sense that your awareness belongs to a you is learned, reinforced through language, memory, and feedback. But if you strip those layers away, awareness doesn't vanish. It expands. And in that expansion, there sits no boundary, no container, no one holding the flashlight, just the light. This has consequences for how you experience selfhood. Because if awareness doesn't have an origin, then neither do you. Not in the way you think. You didn't emerge from a point. You're not located somewhere. You're not watching the world from behind your eyes. You are the watching. And the watching arises with the world, not separate from it. Look around your room. Notice how everything appears effortlessly. Colors, shadows, objects, space. You don't push them into view. They simply appear. And awareness appears with them. As them. So where is the division? Where is the point where you end and the world begins? There is none. There's just the illusion of separateness. And that illusion is powered by the false origin of the gaze. Because if there is no one looking, then everything is what's being seen. You are not behind the eyes. You are the field in which seeing arises. And there is no distance between you and what's seen. This is why, in deep presence, the boundary between self and world dissolves. Not because something magical happens, but because something false stops happening. The construction of the observer falls quiet. And in that quiet, the gaze returns home. Not to a place, but to the recognition that it was never elsewhere. So tonight, as you lie in bed, let your gaze soften. Don't try to focus. Don't try to hold on. Let the room blur. Let your sense of center fade. And feel what it sips like to see, without anyone behind the seeing. To gaze without origin. To be no one looking at everything. To be the looking itself. You stir not just shaped by memory. You stir not just shaped by thought. You're shaped, silently and completely by language. Not the words you say aloud, but the words that form in your head before the world ever hears them. Words that categorize, compare, narrate, and define. The strange thing is this. Before you had words, you still existed. You still felt hunger. You still cried. You still experienced warmth, cold, pain, and wonder. but you didn't still label those things. You didn't say, I am hungry. You didn't say that is love. You just were. Then language arrived. And with it came something entirely new. Identity. Because language doesn't just describe reality. It partitions it. It slices the world into objects, feelings, people, and categories. And in doing so, it gives rise to something you never had before. The concept of I. This section explores the haunting idea that identity is not a discovery, but a construction. And the bricks we use to build it are words. Start with the most basic word, I. When a child first says I instead of their name, something changes. They move from being an experience to owning it. From Jamie wants juice to I want juice. From action to possession. And once you own something, desire, anger, sadness, you become attached to it. You say my feelings, my thoughts, my trauma, my truth. But language doesn't just describe ownership. It creates it. Try this. Sit in silence and feel sadness rise. Now instead of saying I am sad, say silently to yourself, there is sadness. Feel the difference? The first makes sadness part of your identity. The second sees it as a passing state. Both are true, but only one makes you become the emotion. And that difference born from language is where the self hides. Now expand that to every label you carry. I am anxious. I am successful. I am broken. I am spiritual. I am unworthy. I am healing. Each one shapes your reality, not because it's inherently true, but because language embeds it into the narrative of you. But what if those labels aren't set facts? What if they're just grammatical habits you've learned to mistake for truth? Linguistic relativity, also known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, suggests that the language we speak fundamentally influences the way we perceive and categorize the world. In some languages, there are no separate words for past, present, and future. In others, there's no word for guilt or self in the way we understand it. Different tongues shape different realities. So what does that say about yours? If you were raised in a language that emphasized community instead of individualism, would you still define yourself as I? Or would your identity be shaped by we? And if your language didn't make it so easy to say, I am this, would you even have a stable concept of identity? Or would you simply be a process, ever changing, ever moving? Even the word self is a construction. In ancient cultures, there were no rigid boundaries between person and world. Shamans spoke of souls that traveled. Mystics spoke of merging with nature. The boundary of me and not me was flexible. Language changed that. It built walls. It said, this is your name, your job, your belief, your story. Stay inside. And we believed it. But the boundaries are soft if you listen closely. Try speaking about yourself without using the word I. Try journaling without personal pronouns. Try narrating your day in passive voice. Breakfast was eaten. A conversation happened. A thought arose. It feels awkward, disorienting, even. Because language resists the unraveling of identity. It wants to center something. It wants to place a self at the heart of the story. But once you see the trick, you realize it was just grammar all along. This isn't just theory. It plays out in therapy, relationships, self-talk. When you say, I'm always messing things up, you're not describing behavior, you're branding your identity. But when you say, that was a mistake, you allow space. You open the possibility of change. Language can bind, but it can also unbind. In mindfulness practice, this is why teachers emphasize noticing over naming. Instead of saying I'm angry, they suggest, anger is present. Noticing. Not claiming. Not clinging. The moment you put words to an experience, you shape it. You limit it. You frame it inside identity. And some things like silence, awe, or awareness refuse to be framed. When a spiritual teacher is asked, who are you? They often reply, I am. Nothing more. Because the moment you add a noun, a role, a label, you collapse infinite possibility into a single box. So what happens if you stop adding? You become fluid, unbound, undefined. And in that undefined state, a quiet freedom arises. You can still use language, But you don't let language use you. You can still say, I am sad. But you know it's just a sentence. You can still describe your history. But you don't live inside its grammar. The words echo. But they don't trap you. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, watch how your mind tries to tell stories. Notice how it uses words to recreate your day, to explain your emotions, to define yourself. Then gently let the sentence stop mid-air. Let the language dissolve. Let the silence fill in. And in that silence, you might find something that can be said. Something wordless. Something true. Not, I am. Not, I was. Not, I will be. Just this. This breath. This noticing. This presence before identity forms. Because maybe you stir not the story. Maybe you're the space before language begins to speak. What if you've never actually met yourself? Not the roles you perform. Not the memories you replay. Not the voice narrating this sentence. But you, the raw, untranslated self. What if everything you think you are is just a translation? This isn't just poetic curiosity. It's a foundational question. Because translation, by definition, is never the original. It stuffs a representation, an interpretation, a guess. And yet, everything you know about yourself has been filtered through languages, verbal, emotional, cultural, neurological. Every feeling, every sensation, every belief, passed through layer after layer of decoding, before it became you. But who were you before the translation? Let's start with the simplest truth. You don't need to experience life directly. You experience it through interpretation. Light enters your eyes. It seems flipped upside down. Your brain reconstructs the image, then labels it, then attaches memory to it, then emotion. Only after all that does the experience become real. By the time it reaches awareness, it's already a translation. The same is true for touch, taste, sound, and thought. You've never actually heard your voice as it truly is, only the version processed by your bones, ears, and perception. You've never touched an object without the filtering of nerve endings and judgment. Even emotion is translated. You don't feel fear. You interpret a set of bodily sensations as fear, and you name it as such, because you were taught the word. You were taught what it looks like, what it means. So here sits the radical idea. Yourself is not an origin point. It is the sum of these translations. And because translations change with context, so does the self. This is why you feel like a different person in different languages. People who speak multiple languages often describe having different personalities in each one. Because the self is constructed within language, not behind it. You don't find yourself and then express. You express, and in doing so find a self that wasn't there before. Language doesn't just describe identity. It creates it. Even your private self-talk, the voice that seems most you, is just an echo of everything you've heard before. It's borrowed grammar, recycled metaphors, inherited tone. And yet, you believe it sits you. But what if it sits not? What if the you is not the original speaker, but the translation device? Let's go deeper. Imagine trying to explain yourself to someone who doesn't speak your language. You gesture, you simplify, you lose nuance. Now imagine trying to explain yourself without any language. Just silence, just presence. What would remain? Would you still be you? Would there still be a self? Or would there only be sensations, momentary expressions of life, unburdened by narrative? This is the experience that mystics speak of when they describe merging with awareness, becoming one with being. Not because they have found the self, but because the self they knew has dissolved in the absence of translation. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." But if your entire self is wrapped in language, then maybe the limits of language are the limits of self, and maybe silence is not emptiness, but the space where the untranslated lives. This is why the deepest parts of you often feel unspeakable. The feeling of grief that can be explained. The awe that makes your chest tighten. The intuition that pulls you before reason catches up. These moments are not lesser. They are purer. Closer to the original. Before you named them, before you told a story about them. And every time you tell that story, you translate, you distort, you turn raw experience into a narrative, and then call that narrative me. But the story is not the self. It sets the veil, the curtain, and behind it, something waits. Not a higher self, not a truer identity, just this breath, this pulse, this awareness before description. So how do you reach the untranslated self? You don't sit. You stop reaching. You stop narrating. You notice the space between labels. You notice how quickly you name emotions, and then question the name. You let silence speak. And in that silence, you begin to feel the presence you were translating all along. Not as a sentence, not as a label, not even as a thought, but as a field, a humming, a vibration, a being. When you sit in stillness, when the story of you falls quiet, you may notice that nothing disappears. In fact, something arrives. Something more intimate than thought, more honest than memory, more immediate than identity. It has no name. It needs none. And yet, it feels like home. This is not something to hold on to, not something to explain, because the moment you try, you stir it back in translation. Just rest here, in the space before the words come, the space where I hasn't yet formed, where mine has no meaning, where even awareness is too much. You don't need to translate anymore. You seen behind the language. You touched the presence it pointed to, and that presence is what you always been. Not the self, but the space it arises in. Not the translation, but the silence between the lines. Close your eyes and watch the mind. Really watch it. Don't it guide it. Don't it guide it. A memory. A thought arises. Just observe. A sound. An evaluation of the moment. A label. Then another thought. Then another. Then silence. Brief, elusive. Then another thought again. This is the rhythm of consciousness. Not a line, but a loop. You think you're moving forward, building something new with each moment. But if you look closely, you see it. Your awareness often walks the same path. It returns to the same fears, the same memories, the same habits of attention. You revisit old pains like a tongue tracing a sore tooth. You loop through imagined futures like they'll offer safety. And yet, with each repetition, you feel like the experience is fresh, new, real, yours. You replay conversations, rewrite outcomes, rehearse answers to questions no one is asking anymore. What if awareness is caught in a loop? But what if it sits not? A pattern mistaking itself for presence. This section explores the strange truth that awareness isn't always as free or conscious as it feels. It can trap. It can loop. It can replay its own signals, like a skipping record, all while convincing you that you here, now, awake. But are you? Let's begin with the experience of rumination. You stir trying to fall asleep. A worry enters your mind. You think through it, looking for resolution. But it doesn't end. It circles. It evolves slightly, adds detail, maybe even swaps topics. But the loop remains. You wake up the next day and realize you were thinking the same thing yesterday and the day before. Awareness feels like it sips doing something, but it sips not progressing. It sips orbiting. This is not a failure of your brain. It sups a feature. The brain is a prediction machine. It loops information to create a stable sense of reality, like water running in grooves carved by habit. It prefers the familiar, even if the familiar is painful, because it's easier to anticipate. And awareness, when not closely examined, follows those paths automatically, like a stream returning to its old bed after every rain. It means that much of what you believe is you, your personality, your moods, your reactions, is not freely chosen. So what does that mean for the self? It starts rehearsed. It sips remembered. It sips replayed. And the loop of awareness sustains the illusion. I am the thinker of these thoughts. I am the feeler of these feelings. I am this. It sustains the illusion of it. But awareness on loop doesn't cease to create selfhood. It says, look, you stir anxious again, so you must be an anxious person. Look, you stir still remembering that loss, so you must still be grieving. Look, you sit as still imagining that conversation, so it must still matter. But these are not signs of identity. They sit signs of looping. It stops being pulled, used to not choosing your attention. Over and over. The grooves you didn't set carve deliberately, and unless you stop and observe, you till believe the loop is your life. But here sips the turning point. Awareness may loop, but it can also wake up inside the loop. It can turn around and see itself spinning. That subtle click where you notice you stir thinking. That moment. Not just lost in thought. That is the first break in the loop. But watching the thought. Not the kind of choice that controls the thought, but the kind of choice that steps out of it. That sits where choice enters. This is what mindfulness really is. Not clearing the mind. Not achieving peace. Try this. But noticing the loop, and choosing not to follow it every time. Done sem to resist. Done sem to redirect. Sit quietly, and let the mind loop. Just observe. Then ask silently, who is watching this loop? Don't instead answer with a name. Just feel into the question. You'll begin to notice something eerie. The watcher isn't sit part of the loop. It doesn't stare loop. It watches the loop come and go, like waves on a shore. And it doesn't speak. It doesn't judge. It just knows. That knowing, that clear, silent awareness, is not a loop. It scents the space around the loop. It steps what the loop happens within. And that space is your original awareness. Not the story of self. Not the thought of me. A stillness. This is why, in deep meditation or moments of shock or awe, people often feel a sudden clarity. But the raw presence that existed before you ever said I. A sense that time has stopped. Because for a moment, the loop pauses. And instead of another repetition, the machine stops narrating. The record skips. You hear silence. It's tips full. That silence is not empty. And no self at all. It holds all possible selves. It stops the pause before the loop restarts. The breath before identity returns. So what can you do with this? You don't need to escape the loop. You only need to see it. Because in seeing it, you no longer mistake it for truth. You no longer think, this is who I am. You think, this is what Sep's passing through. You feel compassion for the patterns. You no longer feel trapped by repetition. Without believing it, you sit with the loop, and slowly, not because it doesn't step loop, your awareness becomes free, but because it no longer forgets that it's looping, but within it, not outside the loop. That sips the freedom you must have been searching for. As the one who sees clearly, as the one who watches, again and again, that thought is not identity. And repetition is not reality. Feeling is not self. It stops just the loop. You are the space around it. And you are not inside it. You wake up. You remember the day. You remember your name. And without questioning it, you think. You recall your past, your plans, your problems. Yes, I am still me. This section invites you to pull back the veil on a quiet, invisible performance. What if the sense of being the same person day after day is the most convincing illusion of all? But what if that sip's just a mask? It begins in the mind, the moment you open your eyes. The illusion of continuity. A subtle stitching together of memory and expectation. A seamless blending of yesterday and today. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel artificial. But like a theater crew working behind the curtain, it arranges the set, puts the mask back on, and whispers, you steer still the same character. Go on. Let sits look closer. Your cells regenerate. Your preferences shift. You are constantly changing. Your relationships evolve. Your dreams fade and reform. Your memories are updated, reinterpreted, or forgotten entirely. A solid identity holding everything together. And yet, you feel like there's a you at the center of all this change. A core, a thread. But where is it? Try to locate it. Not conceptually, not philosophically, but right now. Where is the part of you that has never changed? Is it a memory, a belief, a feeling? All of those fluctuate. So what gives you the feeling of continuity? The answer, paradoxically, is the narrative of continuity. They come, they go, they contradict themselves. It's just not the experience itself. It's the story you tell yourself about the experience. I've always been this way. Never liked that. I would never do something like that. Just the kind of person who, not lies. These are masks, not fiction, and they are incredibly useful. But masks constructed to hold the illusion together. Continuity helps you plan. It helps you relate. It creates emotional coherence. It gives you a sense of personal identity and stability. But what if it sits not true? What if you mistaken usefulness for truth? Psychologists have studied this in people who've undergone major life changes, trauma, neurological damage, religious conversion, radical personality shifts. And they mean it. I'm not the same person I was. In many cases, people say afterward, not metaphorically, literally, their values change. Their behavior changes. Their sense of self changes. So if the self can be interrupted, erased, rewritten, what does that say about the continuity you feel right now? It suggests something haunting. That continuity is not proof of identity. It's the mask identity wears to appear consistent. Look back at an old photo of yourself, and that mask is fragile. One from years ago. Stare into the eyes of that version of you. Are you really the same person? Not just biologically, not just emotionally, existentially. That person is gone. The truth is hard to face. They don't exist anymore. But instead of grieving that, consider the freedom in it. And the version of you reading these words will be gone soon too. If continuity is an illusion, then so is permanence. So is identity as a prison. You are not tethered to who you were. So is the belief that you must always be a certain way. You are not bound by the stories you repeated. Because the mask can be set down. And behind it is not another, truer face. There is no final identity waiting underneath. Just the quiet realization that you don't need one. That life doesn't require a fixed self. Only presence. Only the willingness to experience what's happening now. Without dragging yesterday's mask into today. Only openness. This doesn't mean you forget your history. It doesn't mean you abandon memory or meaning. But it means you stop clinging to them as evidence of an unchanging you. Because you are already changing. In the space between these words, right now, it is maintained. In the flicker of awareness behind each breath, the self you feel is not fixed, and it reconstructs you from pieces. Every morning, your brain pulls together fragments. Memories, routines, emotions, posture, vocabulary. But because it can tolerate not having one. Not because it finds a core. It wears the mask of continuity. You are the awareness that sees it. But you are not the mask. To keep the machine running, you are not the script. And when you allow that silence in, you are the silence behind the dialogue. When you stop rehearsing the old lines, not as loss, you can feel the freedom of impermanence, but as possibility. Notice how the self begins to dissolve. Tonight, as you prepare to drift into sleep, you stop naming your feelings. You stop performing. You stop thinking in words. And what remains is not identity. The mask slips, but presence. The breath, the warmth, the darkness. And if you wake tomorrow without reaching immediately for your name, the gentle release of being someone, your role, your history, you may catch a glimpse of what you are beneath the mask. Nothing and everything. Held lightly. Changing always. Free. There's a strange assumption built into the way you think about yourself. A core. But somewhere, deep inside, there sits a center. A place where you reside. It doesn't have a location you can name. A seat of identity. But you feel it like a quiet gravity behind the eyes. A pull towards self. An invisible hub that gives shape to the wheel of your life. But what if that center doesn't exist? What if, when you look closely, you find that the center is hollow, that it sits not a throne, but a silence, not a solid presence, but an absence pretending to be one? This section invites you to explore the architecture of identity, and to face the terrifying, liberating idea that at the heart of who you are, there is nothing at all. Let's begin not with philosophy, but with experience. Right now, close your eyes and bring attention inward. Not to your thoughts, not to your emotions, the I behind everything, but to the place you think you are, the still point behind the screen of perception. Ask yourself, gently, where is the self located? You might feel it behind the forehead, or in the chest, or just hovering, like a sense more than a substance. But try to find it. Pin it down. Look for its shape. Define its edges. You'll notice something curious. You can sense thoughts. You can sense feelings. You can sense the body. Instead, you find awareness. But you cannot find a you that contains them. Open, spacious, wordless. And at the center of that awareness, nothing. Not empty in a negative sense. Empty in the way a sky is empty. Limitless, holding everything, yet never touched by what it holds. This idea is not new. It's echoed in traditions across time and culture. In Buddhism, its sept's called shunyata, emptiness. Not a nihilistic void, but a recognition that all things, especially the self, are empty of inherent existence. In Taoism, it sits the uncarved block, the center that moves by not moving. In Western philosophy, David Hume wrote, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception," meaning the self, when searched for, is never found. Only its contents are. So why does it feel like you have a center? Because the mind creates one. It builds it through memory, expectation, narrative. It gathers your preferences, your roles, your habits, and spins a thread through them. That thread becomes the illusion of a center. But it sits not a core. It stops a circle drawn in smoke. And every time you try to grasp it, your hands close on air. There sits no region in the brain responsible for you. This is what neuroscience now echoes too. There sits no command center. No control room. What you experience as self is an emergent property, a byproduct of many subsystems interacting. Perception, memory, emotion, language, body awareness, all coordinated like instruments in an orchestra without a conductor. The melody feels like it's coming from a single place, but it sits not. It sets coming from everywhere and nowhere. Even in daily life, you can feel this if you look. When you stare fully immersed, in music, in nature, in love, you don't feel like a separate self. You feel like being. The sense of a center softens. You expand. And in those moments, you don't disappear. Time dissolves. Because the you usually hold on to was never solid. The inner center, you protect and define. A placeholder. A useful fiction. It was a mask. You've seen behind it. And now, so what does this mean? That there sits nothing real about you? Not at all. Does it mean you sit nobody? An unfolding. You stir a process. It means you set not a thing. It spits empty because you stir free. A river, not a rock. The center is not empty because you stir broken. Free to change. Free to exist without explanation. Free to feel without clinging. When you stop trying to locate a center, you stop needing to be consistent. You stop defending one. To justify. You can rest in the flow. To be understood. Letting experience come and go, without taking it personally. You don't need to be something. Tonight, as your body begins to sink into rest, you can just be. Notice how the self loosens. The thoughts soften. The narrator grows quiet. And in that quiet, not an object, you'll sense something vast. Not a personality. Still, but space. Unclenched. Real. This is your true center. Not a thing, but a stillness. A knowing that doesn't belong to anyone. A seeing without a seer. A presence that holds no name. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to believe it. Just feel it. The way you feel silence. The way you feel warmth. The empty center inside you. The way you feel space without needing to define it. Is not absence. Of everything you ever been. It sits the groundless ground. And it sits waiting for you, right now, a knot in your stomach, a warmth in your chest. You feel something, and without hesitation, a thought slips in. a dull pressure behind the eyes. I am sad. I am anxious. I am falling in love. I am not okay. What if the feeling isn't set what it seems? But pause for just a moment. What if feelings pretend? This section explores a subtle illusion that your emotions tell the truth, that they are honest messengers revealing the state of your soul. But what if, just like thoughts, just like memory, just like the self, feelings can perform, can echo, can loop? What if they don't just reflect reality, but create it? Let's begin here. Feelings are real. They spur, not fake. But they sit not always what they say they are. They arise in response to signals, internal, external, remembered, imagined. But they don't carry built-in labels. Your body doesn't say this is anger. Here sits a rush of heat, a tightening, a shift in attention. It says, and then the mind jumps in and gives it a name, a meaning, a story. This means I'm being disrespected. This means I've been abandoned. This means something is wrong with me. But what if the label is wrong? What if the feeling is real, but the interpretation is fiction? Consider this. The physiological sensations of fear and excitement are almost identical. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, sweaty palms. The only difference is the story you attach. And that story doesn't arise in a vacuum. It arises from memory, context, and habit. From old wounds. From childhood. From culture. So maybe you sit not actually afraid. Maybe your body sits just activated. Maybe the moment reminds your nervous system of something. But your awareness never got the memo. Pretending to be something it sits not. And the feeling steps forward. You assume it's because the other person is judging you. This happens all the time. You're in a conversation, and suddenly, you feel small. But maybe it sits not them. Maybe it sits your history. Maybe it's a tone of voice that mirrors someone long gone. And the feeling pretends. And now the body remembers. Or, you wake up with a heavy sadness. And instead of just feeling it, no clear reason, you search for a cause. You say, I must be broken. Or, my life isn't working. But maybe there is no cause. Maybe it sits just weather, a passing cloud. It was the meaning you gave it. And maybe the mistake wasn't the sadness. This is what makes feelings so slippery. They don't need to be accurate to feel powerful. They just need to be familiar. In fact, some feelings replay themselves over and over. Not because they are relevant, but because they are available. You practiced them. You turned them into identity. You rehearsed them. I can trust people. I am a person who is always worried. I someone who never feels safe. I don't let myself feel joy. You mistake the feeling for truth. And with each repetition, but repetition is not proof. It's just pattern. Sometimes your emotions are like actors in a play, who forgot the show ended years ago. Keep reciting their lines. They keep showing up. Keep believing them. And you, keep pretending to be the main character. What if you could feel fully, without identifying? But what if you could separate the feeling from the story? This is the core of emotional awareness. It doesn't mean suppressing. It doesn't mean bypassing, without letting it pretend to be your name. It means letting the feeling exist. Try this. Don't say I am angry. The next time an emotion arises, say, anger is here. Say, a story of unworthiness is visiting. Don't say, I am unworthy. Don't say I can go on. This tiny shift, this reframing, changes everything. Say, a heavy sensation is moving through. It reminds you, feelings are not final. They are guests. They are weather. And when you stop clinging to them, they are actors on a stage that's always being reset. When you stop asking them to explain themselves, because feelings need attention to survive. They feed on identification. You'll find they often leave as quickly as they came. Lets them pass. You are not your sadness, but awareness that doesn't grasp. You are the space in which they all arise. You are not your fear. You are not even your joy. Perform their parts and dissolve. This doesn't make your emotions meaningless. They can simply be what they are. Because without the burden of pretending, It makes them honest. Sensation, movement, energy, transient truth. You might feel something stir. Tonight, as you close your eyes, a lingering regret, a quiet ache, a wave of nostalgia. Let it stay. Let it come. Let it go. Because the self you truly are. Don't set name yourself after it. But don't set become it. Without judgment. It sips the silence that notices. Is not the feeling. Without labels. Without stories. It sips the part of you that never pretends. The part that doesn't need performance. Still, the part that just is. Because even when the feelings play their part, open, unmoved, you are the stage beneath them. And the stage doesn't flinch. You still told stories your entire life. About who you are. About what happened. About why it matters. I don't like public speaking. Some of those stories are simple. Others run deeper. I'm the kind of person who needs time alone. I've always been afraid of abandonment. I became this way. I never feel like I sipped him enough. I was born this way. But there's something strange hidden in these stories. A recursive trick. A loop that most never notice. The storyteller is also a story. This section explores the quiet paradox at the heart of identity. That the self who narrates your life is itself a narration. A fiction wrapped in memory, language and attention. Writing itself in real time. And forgetting that it sips doing it. Let's begin with something ordinary. You wake up and feel low. You start telling a story. I always feel this way on Sundays. I didn't sleep well. That sips why I sipped off. The narrative builds. Or, it gathers evidence. And by mid-morning, you sip not just feeling low. It pulls in memories from last week, last year, childhood. You become someone who feels low on Sundays. One with a backstory. A character has emerged. A structure. A tone. And here sips the thing. That character is now telling its own story. But who is you if not the character? A story about you. This is the loop. The storytelling story. The narration pretending to be the narrator. It doesn't feel fake. It feels real. You can feel it in your body. It forms the rhythm of your thoughts. But underneath it all, it shapes your posture, your relationships, your tone of voice. Just meaning layered on top of experience. It sips just words. Like a movie playing on a wall you forgot was blank. Most people live their entire lives inside this loop. They don't just have stories. They are stories. Stories that say, this is what I believe. This is how I act. This is what I been through. And because those stories repeat often enough, this is what I deserve. They take on weight. Like grooves carved into the mind. The story becomes the script. And the script becomes the self. But what happens when you pause the story? When you stop mid-sentence and ask, who is telling this? Try it now. Think of a belief you hold about yourself. Something old. Something that feels defining. Now ask, who said this first? Was it you? Or was it someone else? A teacher? A parent? A stranger? A culture? A memory? Did you choose this story? Or did it choose you? Often, you still find the story was inherited, adopted, but never examined, practiced, believed. And so the loop spins. Because stories don't need to be true to feel true. They just need to be told often enough. The storyteller tells more stories. The story reinforces the storyteller. A story arises, not discovered, but authored. And the self is woven into being. This doesn't mean you sit inauthentic. It means you stir a creative force. Even now, in this very moment. About what these words say about you. You are telling a story about what this moment means. About how you will remember this. And that sip's not wrong. It sits just invisible. Until you notice it. Here sits where it gets even more curious. The self isn't just telling a story. It's telling a story about telling stories. I keep repeating these patterns. I always overthink everything. It says things like, I tell myself too many stories. The self narrating its own narration. This is the storytelling story. An echo chamber with no clear origin. No final authority. Just one perspective stacked on another. But what if you stopped mid-loop until it feels like identity? What if you watched the storyteller? You might begin to see that the self, not with judgment, but with quiet curiosity, accepts the space around the narration, is not the narrator. It accepts the silence between words, before the memory activates, because before the story starts, it sups the presence before the sentence begins. Before the label forms, there is stillness. And in that stillness, no role, there is no name, no past, no future, just awareness, just breath. And being doesn't need a story. Just being. It doesn't need to explain itself. It doesn't need to be remembered. It doesn't need to be coherent. It doesn't need to be told about what went right, what went wrong. Being just is. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to tell stories about your day, pause. What it means for who you are. Notice the voice. Notice how convincing it sounds. And then, notice the rhythm. Don't change it. Just step back from it. Don't interrupt it. While you rest in the space behind it, let the story tell itself. And maybe, in that space, something quieter. You'll find something deeper than story. Something unnameable. Not a better story. Not a more accurate narrator. Just the awareness that stories come and go. Because the moment you stop believing the storyteller, you stop being a character. But what you are remains untouched. And you return to what you were. Before the first sentence began. Still, unwritten, open, that there sits a you behind your eyes. You lived most of your life assuming something quiet, simple, and unquestioned. A center, a watcher, a perceiver. A soft place behind the gaze where experience gets processed and ownership begins. It's stuck so deeply ingrained, so intimately felt, that we rarely stop to ask, is it actually there? This section invites you to look, not with your eyes, but through the illusion they carry. To turn the gaze around. To peer into the place where you assume the self is hiding, and see whether anything is actually there. Let steps begin with that feeling right now. You are reading this. You feel like you are located somewhere behind your face. You stare not just a body. You are inside the body, controlling it, seeing out through its eyes like the windows of a house. But when you ask yourself directly, where exactly am I? Something strange happens. There sips no answer. But that sips just where thinking seems to happen. You might point to your head. You might point to your chest. But that sips just where emotion seems to reside. Neither is you. Try this. Close your eyes for a moment. Become aware of all sensations in the body. Sounds, pressure, breath. Now, silently ask, where am I in all this? Not as a name. Not as a thought. But as a presence. There is awareness. And you still find something disorienting. There is sensation. But there is no clear point from which it's being experienced. There is no inside. There is no hidden homunculus. No miniature you seated behind the eyes, pulling levers and making choices. There is perception, yes. But no perceiver you can locate. This is the illusion behind the eyes. That someone must be home. A belief so deeply woven into consciousness that it goes unquestioned. That the house of your body has an inhabitant. But what if it doesn't stet? What if experience arises? And the self is just the story that follows. Neuroscience offers no evidence of a central command center in the brain. There is no single location that houses the self. No eye behind the eye. Only distributed networks, perception, emotion, language, memory, working in synchrony. The sensation of being behind the eyes is just that, a sensation, but not real. Constructed, convenient, familiar. And yet, we live our lives as if it were. I saw that coming. We say things like, I was watching myself. I couldn't believe my eyes. As if the eyes are tools, and we are the one wielding them. But awareness is not behind the eyes. It is not inside the skull. It is everywhere experience arises. The visual field appears in front of you. Sound appears from all directions. Thought appears with no direction. Emotion appears as the body, not inside a body. The more the center dissolves, the more closely you look for where you are, and yet, the illusion persists. Because it sits useful. The sense of a center creates orientation. It helps you move through space, build relationships, plan, speak, survive. But usefulness is not truth. You look at your reflection and think, that sips me. Even the mirror lies. But what you see is reversed, filtered, delayed. And still, you believe that image to be the one behind the eyes. So what happens when the illusion breaks? What happens when you see that there is no one inside? Some people feel panic. Others feel a strange joy. Some feel silence. Others feel freedom. Not someone being present. What remains is presence. Because when the imagined self collapses, not a location, not a person, just presence itself, just hearing, not a container, just seeing, with no one behind it, just feeling. This insight doesn't require belief. You're invited to verify it for yourself. Every time you sit still and notice, it only requires observation. Rest your attention on the experience of looking, not on what you are seeing. Try it now. The sense of looking, then ask, but on the act itself. Who is looking? Don't answer with thoughts. Let the question float. The gaze is present, and you may find there must no one. It's stubbornness, but it comes from nowhere. That nowhere is not emptiness in the sad sense. Space, clarity. And in that clarity something unexpected happens. Because if there sits no one behind the eyes, then the burdens you carried, your fears, your shame, your old definitions, life becomes lighter. Don't sit, have a holder. They become weather, passing moods, mistaken identities. You don't need to be someone. You don't just need to hold it all together. You don't need to maintain a center, because you were never at the center to begin with. You were always the field, the open sky, the canvas. Tonight, as you lie back and close your eyes, notice how the gaze softens. There is no more orientation. Notice how the idea of looking out disappears, floating, unmoored, centerless. No more direction, just awareness. And if the mind tries to find itself again, tries to rebuild the you behind the eyes, gently smile. But you've already seen the truth. Let it try. There is no observer, only holding, only observing. No holder, no eye, only sight. And that is enough. Your mind craves something to hold on to. A belief, a memory, a why, an identity, a goal. It wants grounding, a foundation, a center. But what if the truth is this? Because without it, the mind feels unmoored, adrift in a sea of sensation and thought without a compass. There is no anchor. What if the mind isn't meant to be held in place? What if it was never fixed to begin with? This section explores the unsettling, beautiful idea of a mind without anchor. Not broken, not lost, but free. We often describe peace as grounding, as centeredness, and yet, the mind's nature is not still, as finding stability. It moves. It loops. It flickers like firelight across walls we can't even name. To expect it to be anchored is to misunderstand what it is. The mind is a process, a storm, a pulse. It flows between memory and imagination, between narrative and silence, between focus and forgetting. And we spend so much energy trying to pin it down, to catch it like a fish, to name it like a species, to tame it like a wild animal. But all of that is resistance. All of that is control. All of that is fear. Fear of what might happen if the mind is truly free. Because if it's not anchored, then who are you? Who is the one thinking? Who is the one behind the thoughts? The answer might be no one, or everyone, or nothing at all. But before we chase definitions, let's step into experience. Right now, bring attention to your mind, not to its content. Watch how it shifts. Not the thoughts themselves, but the movement of thought. From this sentence, to something that happened today, to a memory of a place, to a feeling, like a bird darting branch to branch, to a face. The mind does not land, and when it does, it rarely stays. Even in meditation, even in stillness, even in sleep, it drifts. and yet we ask it to be still, to rest. But why? To behave. Because we believe the myth that a still mind is a good mind. That chaos means something is wrong. That wandering is a problem to be solved. But what if wandering is the nature of mind? In Buddhist teachings, the mind is sometimes compared to a monkey swinging through trees. Unpredictable, untamed, playful. But the goal isn't set to kill the monkey. It sets the identification. Because the problem is not the motion. It stops to stop believing it stops you. You don't need to anchor the mind. Because the moment you believe, you need to stop anchoring yourself to the mind. I am my mind. You begin to suffer. You ride every wave. But when you see the mind as unanchored by design, you confuse temporary weather with permanent truth. You chase every thought. You stop trying to hold it. You become the sky. You let it move. Not the cloud. This is more than metaphor. It's a shift in how you relate to awareness itself. Sit quietly. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Try this. No control. Let your mind do whatever it wants. No discipline. No redirection. Let it bounce. Let it imagine. But watch it all. Watch without claiming. Let it narrate. There is a space between you and your mind. A space where no anchor is needed. And you still start to see. But safety doesn't come from control. It comes from clarity. Because anchoring was always a strategy to feel safe. And clarity reveals. Your identification with it is. The mind is not the problem. Even language reinforces the anchor illusion. As if it's an object you own. We say, my mind. As if you are the sole generator of thought. Or worse, I think. But thought arises. Thought is a guest. Spontaneously. Uninvited. If you had full control, and sometimes a stranger, you wouldn't think what you think. You wouldn't replay pain when all you want is peace. You wouldn't remember what you wish you could forget. The mind moves. Not because it sits broken, but because it sits alive. And maybe aliveness isn't supposed to be still. Here sips the twist. It sometimes settles on its own. When you stop trying to anchor the mind, but because you're no longer tightening your grip, not because it was tamed. The storm quiets. When there sips no one shouting at the clouds. This is what ancient traditions point to when they speak of liberation. Not perfect control, but the freedom that comes from non-attachment. Not total stillness. You stirred, not your thoughts. Without needing it to stop. You are the one watching it spin. You stir not your mind. The clearer the mind becomes. The less you grip. That sips the paradox. Not because you fixed it, but because you stopped believing it needed fixing. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let your mind do what it wants. Let it travel. Let it rehearse. Let it remember. And gently, silently, remind yourself. Let it repeat. This is just the mind. It does not need an anchor. It does not need to be tamed. It sets, not the enemy. It stins, not the truth. It stops not you. It scents just air. It stops just movement. It steps just a sky full of stars blinking across time. Patterns without permanence. In the quiet that sees them flicker. And in the space behind those stars. Unanchored. Unburdened. You will rest. Alive. You believe you are the same person you were yesterday. You carry forward memories, habits, preferences, as if there is a single line stretching behind you, unbroken, connecting each version of yourself like dots on a string. Because continuity, the sense that you are the same I across time. But tonight, we challenge that assumption. You assume you are one continuous self. Maybe the most persistent lie of all. A comforting one. A stabilizing one. But still, a lie. Let tests begin at the surface. Your body is always changing. You shed skin, grow cells, lose hair, gain new aches. But your mind, your sense of self, feels like it persists. Every 7 to 10 years, nearly every cell in your body has been replaced. You say that was me in kindergarten. But stop for a moment and look deeper. As if the child in the photo is the same being reading these words now. Not the details. Can you remember exactly how it felt to be that child? Not the highlights, but the interior, the raw awareness, the emotional landscape, the way the world moved inside you, chances are it sips blurry, because that person no longer exists. They were a momentary configuration, a pattern of neurons, memories, sensations, a pattern that has since unraveled and reshaped many times over. And yet you say, that was me, as if a thread has connected each version of you without fail. But here sits the unsettling truth. Continuity is something the mind constructs, not something it discovers. It sets a psychological illusion, a mechanism to help you survive. You wake up each morning with a sense of, I am me. But that I is assembled, not retrieved. And it happens so quickly, you don't notice it. It's a reconstruction based on memory, emotion, language, and social roles. The philosopher Derek Parfit once asked, and your personality completely changed. If all your memories were erased, but your body remained, would you still be you? The question disturbs us because it hits something we rarely want to face. That the you think you are, conditional, is fragile, impermanent. And yet, your mind tells a different story. A story of continuity. A story of sameness. Because that story makes everything else easier to bear. It helps you commit. Helps you love. Helps you apologize. Helps you remember your goals. But just because a story is helpful, doesn't mean it's true. Continuity lies in small, invisible ways. When you recall a memory, when you imagine your future, your brain subtly rewrites it. You base it on who you think you are now, not on who you'll actually be. That your values change. You forget that your preferences shift. You plan your life based on it. That your sense of meaning evolves. And yet you assume continuity. You grieve, not just because someone is gone, but because they can't continue being who they used to be. You trust others based on it. You see the cracks. But when you look honestly, you remember times you behaved in ways that shocked you. Moments when you said, that wasn't like me. I don't know why I did that. But what if it was like you? Just not the version you remember being? This is why ancient traditions and modern science agree on something rare. The self is not a constant. In Buddhism, this is called anicca, impermanence. It sips a process, not just of things, but of selves. In neuroscience, it sits called modularity. There is no central you. The idea that different brain modules take turns running the show. There are many selves, arising based on context. One self in love, one self in rage, one self in hunger. Each speaks with authority. One self in grief. Each believes it sits the only one. Each claims to be the real you. Because there is no single I, but they lie. That illusion is built through narrative. There is only the illusion of one. I was like this, then I changed. Now I stim like this. It makes life feel manageable. But sometimes it traps you. It gives shape. Or you fear becoming someone else, because you're too attached to who you think you are. You believe you can't change, because you've always been a certain way. Or you refuse to forgive yourself, because the past you did something awful. You can loosen your grip. But if you see the lie, you can say, that was me. But it sips not anymore. You can say, I am allowed to be new. I don't need to hold on to that version. You can say, because if the self is not a line, but constantly, not just once, then you are never stuck, but a flicker. If it sips a dance of changing light, you are never obligated to be what you were. You are never broken. And that sips not a loss. That sips freedom. Freedom from the pain of needing to explain yourself. Freedom from the burden of being consistent. You can be renewal. Freedom from the pressure to always be one thing. You can be paradox. Feel how continuity tries to wrap around you. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, you can be forgetfulness and forgiveness and fragments. What you still done. The voice in your mind will remind you who you are. What you still must become. Just listen. And in the space between sentences, but don't believe it completely. Not the story. You may feel something quieter. Not the thread, but the emptiness behind it. The awareness that doesn't require a self. The presence that never needed a history. And behind the truth of change. Because behind the illusion of continuity is the truth of change. is the silence that watches it all. Look in a mirror. Not just glance, but truly look. Do you see yourself? You think that sips your face staring back. You think you do? The one everyone else sees. The one you've seen 1,000 times. Hold the gaze. But pause. What you think is you is already a moment behind. A reflection. A copy. A surface. A delay. Now ask, what exactly are you seeing? It's not presence. It's projection. Light, bounced, processed, reconstructed. And that sips exactly what your sense of self might be. A reflection without depth. Just a facade made of layers. Because maybe, just maybe, there's no true self behind that image. A mirror held up by memories, language, feeling, and fear. Not just in glass, but in life. We stir trained to trust reflections. When others mirror us, validate us, we feel real. When someone says, "That's so you," we nod, grateful. But what are they reflecting? Are they seeing a core you? Or are they seeing a pattern, a consistent performance? And here sips the trap. The more people reflect something back to you, you stir brave. The more you internalize it. You stare as shy. You stir cold. You stir kind. You start seeing what sips being shown to you. Over time, you stop questioning it. But just like a mirror doesn't create a face, social reflection doesn't create a self. It only replicates what sips visible, not what sips real. Coined by Charles Horton Cooley. Let's look at an experiment. In psychology, there's a phenomenon called the looking glass self. We become what we believe others believe. It suggests that we develop our identity by imagining how others perceive us. We don't just guess. We absorb. But what if they sipped are wrong? What if their reflections are distorted? What if your entire sense of self, each one angled, warped, colored by projection, is based on a hall of mirrors? Then who are you really? Maybe no one. Maybe everyone. Maybe both. And that sips the unsettling truth. Most of your self-concept wasn't born from deep introspection. Parents told you who you were. It was mirrored into you. Friends reinforced it. Strangers reflected pieces back. You gathered the echoes, assembled them, and called it identity. What if you said are a kaleidoscope? But what if you were never meant to be one reflection? Always shifting, never fixed? But consider this. That might sound chaotic, even dangerous. Mirrors cannot reflect what's behind them. They only offer surfaces. And if you believe you're just a reflection, you still seek validation to feel real. You till forever chase surfaces. You till look to others to confirm your existence. Not a true self in the traditional sense. But there is a depth underneath. You so mistake being seen for being. Not a solid center waiting to be discovered. But a space. A stillness. It doesn't speak in words. A watcher. It doesn't demand attention. Because it simply is. The ancient texts of Advaita Vedanta say, it doesn't need to be reflected. You are not the roles you play. You are not the body. You are not the mind. Silently. You are the awareness that watches all of it. Without mirrors. And when you stop chasing reflection, you start to feel it. When you stop measuring your identity by what bounces back. A strange quiet. A centerless presence. A weightless awareness. But it takes courage to let go of reflection. Because in a world that teaches you to be someone, to present yourself, saying, I don't know who I am, to define your brand, to build your story. But what if it sits freedom? Feels like failure. The Buddha once held up a flower and said nothing. Truth isn't always in what sips reflected. Just smiled. The lesson. It sips in what simply exists. No explanation. No reflection. No self-image. Just presence. We are so conditioned to measure ourselves through the mirror. Through screens, selfies, bios, opinions. You existed before your name. That we forget we existed before any of it. Before you knew your reflection. Before you were ever praised or criticized. That part of you never needed a mirror. Tonight, as you lie still, you may feel the urge to revisit memories. It just was. But try this instead. To rehearse the identity you wear by day. To reflect on who you have been. Let the memories go. Let the stories unravel. Let the mirror fog up, and listen to the awareness beneath reflection. Not a thought, not an idea, not even a you, just stillness. A presence without story, a space without identity, a depth that cannot be reflected because it cannot be seen, only known, not the reflection. You are not the mirror, waiting, not even the one who looks. You are the space behind it all, watching, free. Have you ever caught yourself in a moment and realized you weren't really there? You were watching it unfold? Yes, but only through the lagging film of thought. You were reacting, planning, remembering, but actually being there, in that exact now. It was already gone by the time you noticed it. Presence, as we imagine it, is an illusion of immediacy. We believe we are here now at this precise second, but neurologically, psychologically, and even philosophically, we are always just a little bit behind. A few milliseconds of sensory delay, a flicker of cognitive processing time, a pause before consciousness kicks in. That's all it takes. And that pause, that's where your so-called self lives. It doesn't exist in the now. It lives in the delay, in the narration that follows experience, in the illusion that someone was there all along to witness it. But that witness arrives late to its own life. In neuroscience, there's a concept called the perceptual delay window. Every time you see, hear, or feel something, your brain processes that input slightly after it actually happens, usually around 500 milliseconds. You don't live in real time. You live in a reconstructed past. Your brain edits and syncs information just enough to create a seamless illusion of now. But technically, it's a lie, a brilliant, necessary lie. And yet, from that delayed feed, you construct identity. You call it presence. Imagine someone narrating a movie. You call it you, but always half a second too late. That sips the voice you mistake for presence. That sips the self you believe is in the moment. That sips your internal monologue. But it never is. This isn't just science. It's existential. It's dirt's always catching up. What if the real you isn't the narrator? Because if you are always behind, then who or what is experiencing the now? But the silent space that receives what has already passed. Consider the Libet experiment, a famous study in neuroscience. Participants were asked to move their finger whenever they felt the urge. Electrodes revealed something shocking, and to note the moment they became aware of their intention. The brain initiated the action before the person consciously decided to move, by a measurable margin. You didn't decide. You noticed the decision. Consciousness, it seems, might just be a delayed report of something already done. Maybe it's not about control. So then, what is being present? Not about will. Not about shaping reality. Maybe presence is just surrendering to the fact that you are not the one driving. Here sits a metaphor. Imagine riding a train through a foggy countryside. You look out the window and see a hill, a tree, a barn. But only after they past. You don't see the moment you are in. You see where you just were. The scenery of your life is always slightly behind. And you, the observer, are always watching the past. But the illusion of control, the illusion of self, says otherwise. It whispers. Yet every thought, every action, every emotion, you set her here, you set her choosing, you set her present. It's just reading the signs as they go by, was already in motion before you arrived to explain it. The voice in your head is not driving the train, is the crack where illusion seeps in. Because we hate uncertainty. This delay, the gap between event and awareness. So we fill in the blanks. We smooth the lag. We need continuity. And in that story, we insert a character called me. But what if presence isn't about insertion? We create a story. But removing the illusion of a self from it? Not adding a self to the moment. What if it's about subtraction? Not to disappear, but to become presence itself. In meditation, practitioners aim to dissolve the self. Zen teachings often speak of mer, a Japanese term that means not or non-existence. And when you sit still long enough, not a self being present, but presence with no self. Not silence, but stillness. You start to feel it. Not emptiness, but clarity. Not a character in time, You don't have to comment on the moment, but time unfolding, with no need for a character. You don't have to ask. You don't have to insert your reflection into it. What am I doing right now? And yet, here sits the final twist. It sits dissolving in it. Because presence is not thinking about the now. You can never catch the moment as it happens. Even the realization that you sit always late to your own awareness comes after the fact. Only after. Only through reconstruction. Only through memory. And that sits okay. Because what remains, beyond all delay, is not a self that needs to own presence, but a presence that exists without a self, a still horizon, a quiet field. Let go of narrating your own now, a moment passing with no observer required. Let go of trying to be present. Let the delay happen. Let the self arrive late. Instead, just breathe. Let life move through you like a wave that doesn't need to be surfed. Something somewhere is already here. Because even if you are always behind, and it doesn't need to be named. At your skin, your name, the edge of your thoughts, the moment you ask this question, something strange begins to happen, because to define a boundary, you must assume there's something on either side. But what if there isn't? Where does the self end? What if the boundary between you and not you is just an illusion drawn in sand, swept away each time your awareness shifts? You see, we spend our lives drawing these invisible borders between self and world, mind and body, inside and outside. We say, this is me. That is not me. But these lines are fluid. Try to find the line between a breath that is inside your body and a breath just leaving your lips. Where does it truly change status? When does air stop being you? Boundaries comfort us. They keep the world manageable. They make identity feel like a territory we can defend. But at the deepest level of consciousness, those boundaries are paper-thin and constantly dissolving. Here sets a thought experiment. Imagine walking into a room filled with mirrors. Every direction reflects you infinitely. But none of those reflections are you. And yet, they all feel familiar. Now imagine one of those reflections steps out of the glass and claims to be real, claims to be you. How would you know which is the original? That's the trick your mind plays every time it draws a boundary between thoughts and thinker, between perception and perceiver, between illusion and reality. Because everything you think of as self is a reflection of something deeper you can't quite see. Neuroscience offers a curious window into this illusion. Studies on body ownership show how easy it is to manipulate our sense of self. In the rubber hand illusion, a fake hand is placed in front of a subject while their real hand is hidden. Both are stroked simultaneously. Within minutes, the brain adopts the rubber hand as its own. The subject flinches when it's threatened, even though logically they know it's fake. Why? The border of self is not a wall. Because the brain doesn't care about logic. It cares about coherence, synchrony, the illusion of continuity, and it will draw the boundary of self wherever it feels most consistent. That's why trauma survivors sometimes describe feeling outside their bodies. Why people in sensory deprivation tanks lose all sense of where their limbs are. Why in dreams we often are someone else, yet feel no contradiction. A loose agreement held together by rhythm, repetition, and memory. Let's look at memory for a moment. It's a suggestion. You might believe your past defines your boundaries, your story, your upbringing, your choices. But those memories, they're not static. They're reconstructed every time you recall them. Changed. Edited, aligned with who you think you are now. And that means the past too shifts its boundaries to match the present illusion. You are not a consistent self moving through time. You are a shifting story drawing temporary outlines around experiences that feel like they belong together. Like dots on a page connected into a shape. But the dots were never connected until you drew the lines. Now think about language. How it carves up the world. In English, we say, I am angry. In Japanese, it sits more like anger is happening. I am sad, draws sadness into the self. Same feeling, different boundary. But sadness is present, lets it float. No ownership. No internal territory to defend. Language isn't just a tool. It's a boundary-making machine. And once those boundaries are named, they feel real. But are they? Are you the voice in your head? Or just the space it echoes in? Are you your body, or just the awareness riding its waves? Are you the memories or the flicker that lights them up? The more you search, the fuzzier the edge becomes. There's a practice in Tibetan Buddhism called neti neti, meaning not this, not that. It's a form of self-inquiry that strips away every identity you try to claim. I am a teacher. Not that. That sips a role. I am a thinker. Not that. That sips a function. I am awareness. Still a label. Eventually, you sit left with nothing. And that nothing feels terrifying. Because what sips left is not emptiness. Until it starts to feel like peace. A kind of spaciousness that doesn't require you to be anyone. So why do we cling to boundaries? It sets freedom from false borders. But maybe the self is more like a wave, rising and falling with each illusion. Because without them, there's no narrative, no character, no progression. We are addicted to arcs. Beginning, middle, end. We want to believe the self is a line connecting all our moments. Maybe it sips a flicker. And maybe you don't need to define your boundaries. A contour. A pause between masks. Here sips a question for you. To stop drawing the line between thought and thinker, and just let the experience be what it is. Maybe you said it here to dissolve them. Where do you end? Right now? Is it at your skin? Your breath? Your last thought? Or are you still expanding? Dissolving into perception. Stretching beyond labels. Blurring into the world you used to watch from the outside. There is no inside, no outside. And when that illusion fades, what sips left? Just an illusion of separation that allows the dance to play out. Not nothing. Stillness. Just stillness. Without a border to hold it. Without a line that says, without a self to narrate it. Because maybe, just maybe, there never was a line at all. This is me. And that is not. What happens to the world when no one is watching? A tree falls in a forest. A clock ticks in an empty room. A breath is taken in the dark, unnoticed by anyone, not even the one breathing it. Does it matter? Does it exist? Does the world continue without an observer? Or is it the observer that never existed in the first place? This section is not about the watched. It's about the one who watches. The observer. The presumed you behind the scenes. The silent presence we believe sits at the center of perception, like the eye of a storm. But what if that presence is just another illusion? What if the observer disappears, and nothing actually changes? Let's explore this absence, not as emptiness, but as a deeper kind of presence, the kind that doesn't need to observe, because it is the observation itself. We start with a paradox. But who is doing the watching? You believe you are watching this screen. Is there someone behind your eyes? Modern neuroscience says no. There is no central observer in the brain, no cockpit, no theater with a spotlighted seat for you, a controller pulling levers, making sense of light and sound. You feel like you are watching because the brain needs to believe in coherence. Instead, there are processes, loops, predictive models running on feedback. No single place where it all comes together, just a choreography of perception. But coherence doesn't yet require a watcher. This is called the user illusion, a helpful fiction that consciousness tells itself. Only a pattern. Like a mouse cursor on a screen. It moves, you follow it, but it's not actually where the work happens. It's just a representation, a simplification. Your sense of being an observer? Just the cursor. Let's test that. Try to catch the moment you become aware of a thought. Notice how you can remember the thought, describe the thought, even react to the thought, but you never catch it forming. It just appears, like lightning, like wind through a window. Can you? You start not thinking your thoughts. You stir arriving at them. And if you're not the thinker, then who is the observer? The answer is subtle. Maybe there is no who. Maybe observation happens without an observer. This is the core of certain non-dual traditions. That awareness is not yours. It doesn't belong to a self. It simply is, like sunlight falling on a mirror. The mirror reflects, but it doesn't see. This has profound implications for how we suffer. Think about shame, guilt, anxiety. All are rooted in the idea that someone is watching, judging, reacting to your actions, your thoughts, your imagined future. But what if that someone isn't sit there? What if that voice is just a loop of language, internalized from others, speaking with your mouth? What if there is no internal judge, only the echo of a courtroom that was never built? The observer disappears, and so does the judgment. You begin to move through life without constantly reporting back to yourself. You begin to live without being watched. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become free. Free to feel pain without naming it. Free to experience beauty without narrating it. Free to be without needing to prove you exist. There is a term in Zen for this, mushin, or no mind. Not a blankness, but a presence that doesn't center around a watcher. When a dancer becomes the dance. When you become the act of seeing, rather than the seer. When the musician becomes the music. That sips mushin. And it starts when the observer fades. But here's the twist. It's just not mystical. It's just perceptual. Just when you think the observer is gone, it returns. I was so present just now. Suddenly, quietly, it creeps back in the form of reflection. I really lost myself in that moment. But to say you lost yourself is to assume a self that can be lost. To say you were present is to imply a watcher that recorded the presence. Now you know it sips an illusion, but softer, slower, and so the illusion returns. And that sips enough. You don't have to destroy the observer. You just have to stop mistaking it for something permanent. Focus on your breath. Try this. Sit quietly. Just sound. Just breathing. And every time you notice your mind say I am breathing, drop the I. Just sensation. Soon, there's no one left to observe. Only observation. And in that gap, there sips peace. Not the peace of sleep, but the peace of unburdening. Not the peace of forgetting. Of no longer having to be someone all the time. The observer doesn't die. What disappears is not consciousness. What disappears is the illusion that it needs a center. It dissolves. And in its place is awareness, quiet and expansive, like sky. You still function, still move, still feel. But it happens without a narrator. And the most beautiful part, without a watcher, because no one was ever really there to begin with. No one misses it. You said probably never heard it. Not really. Between the noise, under the language, beneath every internal dialogue. But it sips always there. Silence. But the paradox is, the moment you try to hear it, you fill it. Not the kind that fills a quiet room. Not the awkward hush of conversation fading. Not even the peaceful calm of a forest after rainfall. This silence isn't external. It lives in the folds of your own mind between your thoughts. And if you listen closely, if you slow down enough, you might notice it. You speak over it. You ruin it simply by wanting to catch it. Because silence isn't something you grasp. It's something you fall into when the illusion of thinking takes a breath. Let's sit in that silence for a while. That gap, that subtle pause between thoughts, is not empty. It is you, in your purest form. Not the you who talks, not the you who thinks, but the you who simply is, when nothing else is happening. Thoughts are relentless. They arrive without warning, looping, echoing, replaying scenes that haven't happened, and conversations that never will. We narrate our lives constantly, like a commentator on a game no one's watching. But have you ever wondered, what's between the thoughts? That tiny pause after a sentence ends, and before another begins. That breath, before your mind latches onto a new distraction. Those moments, those barely there silences, are not mistakes. They are doorways. That flicker of stillness when you suddenly space out without realizing it. In mindfulness meditation, they are referred to as gaps. Gaps in mental activity. Gaps in identity. Gaps where the mind stops constructing its usual stories and simply pauses. Not long, not even a full second sometimes. But in those gaps, your sense of self drops away. But in a quiet, almost imperceptible dissolve. Not in a dramatic vanishing act. You are not your thoughts. And it sips in that dissolve that you glimpse a truth. You are the awareness that notices when a thought ends. But this awareness, this pure witnessing, is so easily forgotten. The mind rushes to fill in the space, like white noise generators in a quiet room. Your brain hates silence. It wants continuity. It wants narrative. It wants distraction. Why? Because silence is threatening. Because in that silence, there sips no one there. There sips no voice, no role, no opinion, no name. Just being. And for a mind addicted to identity, that's terrifying. but for a self-seeking peace. It steps liberating. Let's test it. Close your eyes for a moment. Listen to your thoughts. Don't try to stop them. Just observe. A sentence, a memory, a plan. Soon, a thought will rise. Maybe half a second. Maybe less. Now, wait. There will be a tiny break before the next one. Can you feel it? That brief stillness? That is silence between thoughts. It's the place where you aren't pretending to be anything. It sits not blank. It's where thinking ends, but identity hasn't yet resumed. It sits not numb. It sits still, alive. This silence isn't sit passive. And yet, no self exists there. Whole. It sits not absence. It steps, not nothing. It steps awareness without content. A moment when the mirror doesn't reflect, yet remains perfectly clear. Consciousness without narration. In Buddhist philosophy, this is called shunyata, emptiness. But not the emptiness of despair. The emptiness that allows everything to exist. Like the space in a cup that lets it hold tea. Not the cup. Between thoughts, you are the space. Not the tea. Just space. And in that space, there sips peace. Why does this matter? Because your suffering lives in thoughts. In memories. In stories. But your freedom lives in silence. And you don't need hours of meditation to find it. In imagined futures and repeated scripts. Like finding stillness between footsteps. Like hearing the quiet after laughter. You just need to notice the pauses. These silences are everywhere. Like pausing between sentences. But they sit not empty. They spurt sacred. So what would happen if you began to live from the silence? If instead of reacting from thought, you responded from stillness? You'd stop needing to defend who you are. Because you'd realize you don't have to be anything at all. You sit listen more deeply. You speak more slowly. You could just be. Without opinion. Without title. It would make you real. It wouldn't make you dull or passive. Without effort. Creativity. Love. Because everything authentic arises from silence first. Compassion. These don't come from thinking. Stillness. They come from the space between. If the silence between thoughts is your truest self, let's go one step deeper. Because silence threatens the illusion. Why do you keep running from it? Why do you chase stimulation, distraction, endless scrolling, and ceaseless internal chatter? It shows you what sits beneath all the pretending. And what sits beneath isn't set to character, isn't it a role, isn't that even a name. It sits just presence. And presence is enough. Not drowning in them either. Not forcing thoughts away. Let that be your practice tonight. And when the next thought ends, just watching, waiting. Don't reach for the next idea. Don't cling to the last memory. Rest there. In the pause. Just rest. In the breath. In the silence. That sits where you are. Not the you who thinks. But the you that doesn't need to do anything at all. The you that simply is. Not the you who talks. You weren't born knowing who you were. You didn't arrive into this world with a self. You were handed one. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Name, gender, language, family roles, cultural scripts. Things you were told you liked, things you were punished for disliking. And slowly, a shape formed. An outline, a character sketch. Not from inside you, but from the world pressing its expectations onto you like soft clay. You adapted. You performed. You learned to become the reflection others needed. And now, here you are. A self made from hindsight. A self built backwards. Because if you really look, you notice something strange. Your identity isn't set leading your life. It's steps following it. We imagine our sense of self as the driver, the chooser, the conscious captain of the ship. What if your self is more like the historian? But what if it sits not? The one who shows up after everything's happened, takes some scattered notes, and pretends it was all intentional? Psychologists call this the interpreter module. It's a part of the brain that fills in the blanks, that creates narrative coherence, that ties your choices together into a story that makes sense after the fact. Your brain instantly tells you, I like blue. You walk into a room, Pick up a blue mug instead of the red one. But none of that was present before the action. I felt calm when I saw it. I always choose blue. You just acted. Then, your mind constructed a reason. It filled in the blanks. It built identity backwards. Take memory. Most people believe memory is the foundation of self, but memory isn't sat solid. It's dots, not even accurate. You don't retrieve memories like files from a hard drive. You reconstruct them. Every time you recall something, you rewrite it based on current mood, context, story, need. And each retelling changes the past just a little. Not maliciously, not consciously, just subtly. So the past you think made you you is being rewritten by the present you, a loop, a spiral. Who was created by a rewritten past? Now consider language. You didn't choose your words. Identity not as a foundation, but as a feedback system. And once you had them, they started shaping how you saw the world. The word I becomes a cage. They were given to you. A boundary. You say, I feel sad. But maybe there's no I at all, just sadness arising in awareness. Language creates roles. But what is success, except a word that's been defined for you, long before you ever felt it? Or I want success. And expectations harden into identity. Roles create expectations. But the process happens after the fact. Self-built backwards. And then language rushes in to claim it, own it, label it. Something arises. You describe yourself in terms like introvert, planner, creative, spiritual, anxious. But are these truths? Even your personality might be a reconstruction, or just consistent patterns your mind has organized. Studies show people act differently in different situations. Change one context, and the personality changes too. You set a collage. You stir not a single self. A mosaic of reactions and stories and feedback loops, constantly updating. So it picks the patterns it sees most often. Yet your mind craves stability, and declares, this is me. But because it sets useful. So what happens when we try to trace the origin of the self? Not because it sits true. We find no clear beginning, just a slow layering of roles, reactions, and reconstructions. No moment when identity was born fully formed. Like a book that sits written by its reader. Like a painting that paints itself by looking in a mirror. You weren't set given a self. You weren't set born with one. And now, that self narrates your life as if it was always there. You built one from the outside in. This doesn't sit mean you stir fake. And in that disappearance lies freedom. But if you rewind far enough, it disappears. Or that your experience is done sent matter. It means the version of you that claims authorship is a storyteller. A voice that works best when it's quiet enough to notice how little it actually knows. Because real awareness doesn't need a self to function. You don't need to say I see in order to see. You don't need I feel in order to feel. Those are after the fact commentaries. The experiences arise. And now, let sits turn that around. And identity rushes in to catch up. Self-built backwards. What if, instead of justifying who you are, you simply noticed what's here? What if you stopped building from the past? Not what fits your story. Not what aligns with your traits. Not what validates your past roles. Just this moment. There sits just the ocean, the waves, the motion. You might realize there's no one inside steering the ship. You stir not the sailor. You steer the sea. Let go of the idea entirely. Tonight, don't try to find yourself. Let go of who you thought you were yesterday. Stop chasing an origin story. Let go of who you spent trying to be tomorrow. Emotion. Sensation. Instead, observe what steps are rising right now. Awareness. Without owning. Without labeling. No historian. Just experience flowing through consciousness. Like clouds passing in an open sky. Only now. No narrator. No self. Only this. And that sip's enough. You are the main character of a story that no one else is reading. Every morning you wake up and step into the costume of you, habits like armor, preferences like plot points, thoughts like dialogue. You take your place in a world that expects coherence, continuity, a consistent narrative. And so, you deliver. A self made of story. But what if this entire performance, this idea of a stable self, is just a fiction, not a lie, exactly, but a creative illusion, a narrative scaffolding holding together a collection of memories, emotions, sensations, and expectations. A character so convincing that you forgot you were the one writing it. The human mind is obsessed with coherence. If something doesn't make sense, we explain it. If something feels out of place, we weave it into the plot. Even when we're not conscious of doing it, we're editing, adjusting, smoothing over the rough edges of reality. This is the function of self-storytelling. In psychology, this is called the narrative identity, the internalized and evolving story that we tell ourselves about who we are. It includes our past, "I've always been this way," our present, "This is who I am now," and our imagined future, "This is who I'm becoming." Even though it's unreliable, even though it makes up motives we never had, even though it forgets half the facts and invents the other half. But here sits the problem. We believe the narrator. We trust it. Because it sounds like us. Because it feels like us. Imagine if you picked up a novel, and each page rewrote the previous chapter. Characters changed backstories. Events shifted timelines. Emotions reversed. Names blurred. Your stew'd call it incoherent. But that's how your identity works. Memory is malleable. Mood alters perception. New information reshapes old beliefs. The you that you remember is reconstructed every time you recall it. But the story keeps going, and your mind keeps telling you that you're still the same person. Even when you set a knot. Even when you changed entirely. Because the story insists on continuity. And we want to believe it. Think of how you describe yourself. You might say, "I am not good with change," or "I am always loved helping people," or "I am terrible at confrontation." But these aren't facts. They're character traits, summaries, tropes. And like all good fiction, they are flexible. You say it long enough, it becomes true. Self-description is often self-creation. Maybe you weren't always like that. Maybe you're only like that around certain people. Maybe it's just something you started saying about yourself and never stopped. Not because it was always true, but because you made it so, through repetition, belief, and behavior. In therapy, this phenomenon becomes obvious. The story wrote the self, and slowly, through reflection and challenge, the story begins to change. People come in with rigid stories. "I am unlovable. I ruin everything. I have to be strong for everyone. I never finish anything." It turns out the unlovable person was deeply loved, but couldn't accept it. When the story changes, the self changes. The failure had never actually failed, just feared trying. The strong one was never allowed to be weak. The story was the self. But this isn't just psychological, it's neurological too, because they were never separate. In other words, the resting state of the brain is storytelling. The brain's default mode network, the part most active when we're not doing anything in particular, lights up when we think about ourselves, our past, our future, or other people's thoughts about us. It sips simulating, reconstructing, narrating, rehearsing, even when you don't ask to be. You think you're just being, but your brain is busy composing. And you stir the main character. There sips no one narrating. This is why meditation and mindfulness can feel so strange at first. When you stop engaging with the story, when you simply observe without reacting, the self feels like it disappears. No one interpreting. Just sensation. Just breath. And for a moment, you experience what it's like to be alive, without the fiction. Just awareness. Without the role, without the name, you stir not gone. Without the script, not explaining, not rehearsing. You are just not pretending, not identifying. So what happens when we recognize the self as fiction? You stir simply here. You don't have to keep playing the same character. It doesn't mean we fall apart. It means we stop mistaking the story for the truth. It means we gain freedom. You can stop narrating altogether. You can revise the narrative. You can change the plot. Unwritten. Because behind the fiction, there is awareness. Silent. Unowned. Watching. And it's always been there. Listening. Waiting. You don't have to erase your story. You can honor it. Respect it. Use it when needed. You are not the plot points. You are not the lines on the page. But don't misbelieve it sits you. You are the space in which the story appears. You are not the narrator SIP's voice. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to close the book. Let the fiction rest. And let what remains, that quiet presence, remind you that it was never about the story. Let the story dissolve. That SIP's where you really are. And that SIP's where you SIP always been. It was about the stillness underneath it. You're hearing it right now, that voice inside your head. It sounds like you. It speaks in your language. It echoes your worries, narrates your actions, and sometimes even argues with itself. It feels familiar, intimate, like the core of who you are. But have you ever stopped to ask, where did this voice come from? And more importantly, is it really yours? In this section we'll explore the haunting idea that the voice you trust most, the inner commentator of your life, may not be as real or original as you think. It may not be the voice of your true self, but something built out of borrowed words, rehearsed beliefs, social scripts, and echoes of other people. A voice fabricated, but believed. And once you start to notice its seams, everything starts to unravel. Language is learned. That much is obvious. We're not born speaking English or Urdu or German. We absorb language from our parents, teachers, cartoons, books, memes, prayers, lectures, and slowly we begin using those same words to speak back, first to others, then to ourselves. The inner voice is not something we invent on our own. It's something we inherit. And that means it's filled with the voices of others. The voice in your head might sound like you, but it's been shaped by your mother's warnings, your teacher's scoldings, your culture's expectations, your religion's tone, your friend's sarcasm, your boss's feedback, and your own rehearsals of right and wrong. You're not listening to yourself. You're listening to a chorus, pretending to be solo. In fact, this inner voice is so dependent on external input that some cultures don't even experience it the way Westerners do. In many indigenous or Eastern traditions, the sense of a continuous narrating is much weaker or even absent. Instead of identifying with the voice, people identify with the silence between voices or with the larger relational web around them. It might be cultural, which means that the experience of me as an inner speaker might not be universal. It might be fiction, because it's constant, it's loud, and it tells you it's you. But that doesn't stop it from feeling real. I deserve a treat. And yet, have you noticed how often that voice contradicts itself? I should eat healthier. No. I'm just tired. I'm lazy. I'll start tomorrow. Why am I like this? The inner voice is not a wise inner guide. It's often confused, conflicted, insecure, and repetitive. No, I won't set. It is not consistent. It is not original. It says things that don't match your values. It judges you with rules you don't remember agreeing to. It repeats insults from people who are no longer in your life. It mimics ads, influencers, religious figures, politicians, old friends, because it sounds like you. And yet, you obey it. Now imagine someone following you around all day, narrating everything you do. You start brushing your teeth too fast. Why did you say that? That was dumb. Don't forget to email that client. She doesn't set like you. You stir being too sensitive. You sit or not doing enough. But don't sit be lazy. You should rest more. If a person said these things to you, non-stop, you'd probably call it harassment. Because we're taught to trust the voice in our head, we're taught to associate it with our identity, our willpower, our intelligence. But when your inner voice says them, you call it thinking. Why? Meaningless, reactive, looping noise. But what if it sits just noise? What if the real you is the one hearing the voice, not the voice itself? You still there. Some people discover this during meditation. Others notice it in moments of crisis or deep fatigue. The voice quiets. The mind grows still, and something strange happens. Even without the commentary. Even without the inner speaker telling you what to feel, what to regret, what to do next. You still exist. Even without the thoughts. It was an overlay. Which means the voice was never you. A mask. You are what remains when the voice falls silent. Now here sits where the illusion deepens. A sound effect. The inner voice doesn't just narrate, it shapes. When it says you always mess things up, you feel guilt. When it says you're better than them, you feel pride. When it says they're going to leave, you feel fear. It doesn't just reflect emotion, it produces emotion. And when you believe it, it becomes prophecy. You lash out. You hesitate. You isolate. But it wasn't set right. And then the voice says, "See? I was right." You spiral. It was creating the very behavior it predicted. It steps a script. The voice isn't a mirror. But thinking is not necessarily speaking. The mind has many layers. There are sensory impressions, visual flashes, emotional tones, bodily feelings, wordless hunches, intuitive nudges. Good question. You might think, okay, but if the voice isn't set me, then who sets thinking? The inner voice is just one layer, the loudest one. You can think without speaking in your head. You can feel without narrating. You can know without verbalizing. But not the deepest. Just look around the room you're in, without labeling anything. Try it right now. No words. Notice the quiet that sits already there. Just presence. That sips you. The mind will try to reclaim the voice. It will say, "This is how I function." It will resist silence. It will call it boring, scary, empty. But silence isn't empty. It's spacious. You stir simply here, awake. And in that space, you're no longer trapped by recycled thoughts, inherited opinions, or fabricated commands. And whole, untethered. So the next time the voice in your head tells you who you are, ask who taught you that. Whose voice is that really? What if you could let it pass, like a cloud across the sky? What if you didn't respond? You still be here. What if you didn't believe it? Still breathing, still aware, and maybe that quiet presence, the one beneath the words, was the real you all along. Still you, not a voice. Silent, still, complete, but a witness. What if the only thing keeping your identity together is belief? Not truth, not memory, not experience, just belief. Not even your belief, but belief that believes itself. In this section, we'll explore one of the most haunting concepts in the psychology of self, that who you are is not a stable thing you are, but a temporary construct you believe in. A self assembled from assumptions, stories, reflections, and roles that are constantly being rehearsed and reinforced, until belief makes them feel real. But here's the trick. Once a belief about yourself becomes strong enough, it doesn't feel like a belief anymore. It feels like you. Think about this. When you were 5 years old, you believed you were one thing, maybe curious, maybe shy, maybe loud, weird, invisible, magical. Whatever it was, it felt true. And then when you were 10, the belief changed. Then again at 15. Again at 20. Again last year. Each time, you believed you had figured out who you were. And each time, it changed again. Each time, that belief felt final. But what if it was never the self that changed? What if it was just belief putting on different masks, and you mistook each mask for your face? You had evolving belief. Belief with a storyline. You never had a stable self. Belief pretending to be a soul. Psychologists have long noticed how easily people shape their behaviors around core beliefs, even when those beliefs are flawed or false. Belief with a voice. In both cases, the belief creates the conditions for its own fulfillment. If someone believes they're intelligent, they take intellectual risks, engage deeply, and persist through confusion, which usually leads to growth, which reinforces the original belief. If someone believes they are unlovable, they will act withdrawn, interpret neutral events as rejection, and avoid closeness, which often leads others to actually pull away. Thus, the belief proves itself true. You might think, but I have evidence for who I am. I done things. I failed. I failed. I succeeded. I learned. But what happens if you stop believing? The self becomes the child of belief. But remember, belief is also what filters which evidence you notice and which you discard. You believe you're bad at public speaking, so you remember every stutter and ignore every compliment. And that sips true, sort of. You believe you're awkward, so you replay that one bad moment and dismiss all the smooth ones. You believe you're strong, so you reinterpret past failures as stepping stones. Your belief is your lens. Not just the outer world, but the inner one too. And the lens shapes the world. Beliefs don't need to be examined to work. They spur embedded in your language. In fact, the strongest ones are the ones you don't even know you have. I've always been like this. But what if you are? I'm not the kind of person who... This is just who I am. What if you could be? What if identity isn't set inherited, but chosen? What if you is just belief, paused in the act of becoming? Right now, choose one. Try this experiment. Imagine a different belief about yourself. I am whole. Something kind, expansive, gentle. I am patient. I am learning. I am not my past. Now hold it, not as a fact, but as a lens. Thinking differently, you still start acting differently. Walk around with it, speak with it, breathe with it. Pretend it's true for a few hours, just long enough to see what shifts. Which is to say, you'll become someone else. And if you keep going, believing differently, feeling differently. Not because you changed fundamentally. This is how transformation works. But because belief changed shape, and you moved with it. Not through denial. Not through force. Not through trying to erase your past. When you believe you are healing, everything becomes medicine. But through the gentle, quiet re-scripting of the beliefs you carry about who you are. When you believe you are broken, everything confirms that. This also explains why people cling to harmful beliefs. Belief doesn't wait for proof. Belief creates it. Because identity is built on them, and if those beliefs dissolve, the self feels like it might dissolve too. You believe you are alone. What if connection rewrites your script? You believe you are anxious. Who would you be without that? You believe you are unworthy. What if that was never true? It stirs the self that Seb's afraid to be rewritten. It sips not just the belief that resists changing, but here sips the secret. Every day, every month, every chapter of your life, you have already been rewritten. Some philosophers take this further. The self has always been fluid. What changes is what you're willing to believe next. Not even a real you hidden deep down. They say there is no self beneath belief. Just layers and layers of constructed narratives, linguistic habits, bodily memories, neural patterns, social mirrors, a system held together by attention and repetition and reinforcement. And once you stop reinforcing it, it doesn't collapse. It simply softens. A mirage made of belief about a self becomes less fixed, less defensive, less me. And in that softening, something else arises. Not a better self, but presence. Not an identity, but awareness. Not a story. You don't need to stop believing, but stillness. You just need to remember that belief is not identity. Belief is flexible. Belief is creative. Belief can heal. Belief can trap. And when you watch belief arise and fall without grabbing onto it, something amazing happens. You stop being the one who is the belief. From there you set free, and start becoming the one who witnesses it. But because you stopped needing one, you became space. Not because you found your real self. A possibility between illusions. A pause. Imagine a mirror turning inward. Now imagine that mirror reflecting another mirror. Then imagine both mirrors folding into themselves, not breaking, not shattering, but folding, layer by layer, until what's left isn't reflection, but silence. That sips the theory of the self we sips reached. A self not as substance, not even as illusion, but as a recursive spiral, a hallway of impressions that slowly closes in. The final theory in this journey suggests that the illusion of self does not collapse outward into something truer. Instead, it folds in, like a dream folding in on itself before waking, or a sentence that loops back to its own beginning. Let's take a final walk through this inner maze. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel what lies on the other side of illusion is not truth, but peace. We've built an entire structure throughout this journey. You were introduced to the idea that self might just be a pause, a breath between moments of illusion. We questioned the solidity of identity, the reliability of thought, the supposed narrator in your head. We wandered through memory, through the roles language forces upon us, through mirrors that held no original behind them. And now, there sips nothing left to walk into. Just the folding. Not the breaking. Folding is softer, gentler. What does it mean for illusions to fold inward? Quieter. This illusion doesn't end with a scream. It ends with a whisper, one you almost miss. First, you see your own beliefs. Then you begin to see that your beliefs are shaped by older ones. It means each layer of false self begins to reflect back upon itself. Eventually you realize that even your attempts to break free from these patterns are patterns themselves. Then you notice that even your reactions are recycled, scripts embedded in muscle, tone, memory. Every illusion you think you've escaped is just another folded layer of the same origami. And yet, within this recognition, something opens. You rest. Because once you see that escape is just another room in the maze, you stop trying to escape. You don't fix the illusion of self by discovering the true self. Here sits the paradox. And in that rest, the folding begins. Not because it sits false. And as you watch, it begins to fold in. You dissolve the illusion by watching it. The illusion of identity is exhausting. It has to maintain consistency, protect stories, justify feelings, rationalize change, explain contradiction. But awareness doesn't do any of that. But because it sits tired, it just notices. It allows. It breathes. And in its gaze, the layers of the false self loosen. They crumple inward. Not in defeat, but in surrender. There's a moment in many meditative traditions when the seeker realizes there's nothing left to find. They've deconstructed the ego, interrogated the voice in the head, peeled back memory, language, culture, thought, sensation, and finally come face to face with emptiness. Not a scary emptiness, but a still, holding emptiness. Not a meaningless one. Like standing in a room where all the walls have turned to fog. Because what's left is not a self. And in that moment, they stop searching. Not a truth, but a silence that contains all of those things and needs none of them. Not a soul. They return. They don't break. That's what it means when illusions fold inward. They bow back to the space they came from. Each section looped back on a previous one. Yusef probably noticed something as this script unfolded. Memory rewriting memory. Thought without self. Beliefs becoming the illusion. Even language. This script doubled over, pointing at itself, doubting its own voice. Awareness trapped in its own echo. That's not a coincidence. The spiral is the story. And as it continues spiraling inward, it invites you not to solve it, but to let it go. The structure is the message. You stir not. Because the final illusion is that you are separate from the illusion. To fold with it. You are it. So what happens next? And you are the space that holds it. Maybe you fall asleep. Maybe you wake up tomorrow and forget this entire theory. Maybe nothing. Or maybe you wake up with a little more space inside. A little more kindness for the chaos you used to call. A little less need to define. Maybe, when someone asks, "Who are you?" you'll smile and pause. And in that pause, you still hear the folding. You don't even need to understand it fully. You don't need to become anything else. You don't need to destroy your identity. You just need to watch. And breathe. And notice that the more you soften your grip, the more the illusion begins to gently unravel itself. You don't find yourself. That sips the paradox of self-realization. You find the place where finding isn't necessary anymore. Where awareness just is. You arrived with a question, maybe not spoken, maybe not even known, but still, a question was there. A quiet wondering about who or what you are beneath the noise. And now, after all the spirals, mirrors and vanishing points, the answer is not what you expected. Not because it sits complicated, but because it sits silent. Self isn't a structure you can climb. It isn't a destination or a fixed point in thought. It isn't a thing to be discovered or dismantled like a broken machine. It's a breath. A moment of stillness between illusions. A pause where everything that seemed solid begins to shimmer and dissolve. You've traced the threads through memory that invents itself, language that reshapes reality, thoughts that appear without a thinker. You've looked in the mirror and found no one watching. You've stepped into the loop where the story writes the storyteller, and with each turn, the idea of a central you slipped further into the background. Because you don't disappear in that silence. You become the silence. And that is the beauty of it. Not yours. The one who was asking, "Who am I?" That voice. It was just the next illusion. Another wave cresting before it folds inward again. And beneath it, behind it, between it, there's no separate self. There sits just awareness. Just awareness, untouched, unnamed, watching. If you sit still awake, notice this. Not mine. You don't need to chase identity anymore. You don't need to hold the narrative together. You don't need to be someone so that the world makes sense. You can just be here, in this breath. And when thoughts come again, and they will, you don't need to believe them. Just watch. Let them unfold. Let them fold. Let them go. In this stillness. In this pause between illusions. Because maybe you were never holding anything. Maybe you were always the space in which it was all happening. You don't have to hold them to be real. There sits nothing wrong with the illusions. And whether you drift into sleep now, or carry a piece of this silence with you into tomorrow, know this. Tonight, you dissolved into that space. Just shadows moving across the stage. They are not the enemy. They are just masks in the play. But now, you seen behind the curtain. And even if the show continues, you tell no. You are not the script. You are not the actor. You are not the mask. You are the pause. The space. The silence. Sleep well. The present path between illusions.